with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal.
In Sam's throat.
The heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. Don't drink from the Gowanus Canal. On the program today, Jonah Furman, writer at Labor Notes, author of Who Gets the Bird newsletter on Substack, on the temporary strike-averting railway deal. Then Seth Harp, investigative reporter and contributing editor at Rolling Stone, on the overdose crisis at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And in the fun half of the program today, special debate with Brad Palumbo, journalist and policy correspondent at the Foundation for Economic Education, wherein I will get schooled as to why we shouldn't have, I guess now in the past, and maybe not in the future, forgive any student debt. Meanwhile, Putin calls up more troops, should say reservists, as Russia's invasion and war is faltering. First time since World War II, they have called up reservists. Meanwhile, the Fed set to sink the economy into recession, all to discipline labor. Civil rights firm representing the migrants, more or less hoodwinked by Ron DeSantis, files a class action lawsuit against Governor DeSantis. That's dumb, but I like it. Trump's Save America PAC reportedly spending lavishly on saving Trump from legal bills. And Vance and Ryan in dead heat in Ohio as McConnell's PAC decides to pack up and leave Arizona. Lindsey Graham's Republican federal abortion ban will all but require transvaginal ultrasounds to protect doctors from legal jeopardy. Next January 6 hearing scheduled for September 28th as the House looks to pass reforms to the Electoral Count Act to stop another Republican electoral stunt. And Planned Parenthood centers in California are reporting an 847% jump in Arizonan patients since the Supreme Court ruling. Joe Biden to speak at the UN today, and Extinction Rebellion Boston activists arrested as they shut down Boston streets. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. It is, of course, the day that my co-host made famous with her very clever, and I'm finally just getting this now too. What is it? Say your famous catchphrase for today.
It's hump day.
Yeah. It
Wow.
took a long time for me to figure it out, but it's in the middle of the week.
Man.
Just like a camel's hump.
An eagle hump.
Yeah, we get.
Wait, is it
I
like
get
a
eagle
camel's
bumps
hump?
when we think about it.
Yeah.
No, well,
Not a goose hump, an eagle hump.
I'm just just waiting out for whenever this dies down, this fixation on me saying hump day.
You know what it was? It would have just all gone away if we hadn't gotten 2 emails out of the tens of thousands of people who watch this program or listen to it. We got 2 emails claiming that you did not coin that phrase.
Oh.
And that's enough for me to want to push it.
Well, that's an affront
for years.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, now that you've bruised my ego, emailer, to 2 emailers, it's hump day forever, bitch.
Well, part of the problem too is I have a psychological problem that when I see that like someone writes in and says, you know, she did not coin that phrase. I heard that phrase before probably she was even born. Mm-hmm. Then my psychological problem is that then I have to pretend that you did until I die.
Until the end of time.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'll remain on board.
Yep. All right. Good. Got a lot to get to today, folks. So let's jump right in. It's interesting. We have another clip like the one we played yesterday, where Sean Hannity is pressing his guests to essentially say what DeSantis did was illegal. And I think that's Hannity's really ham-fisted and inept way of championing Donald Trump. But nevertheless...
Donald Trump, who didn't comment on it either. He was given a chance to comment on it, and he started talking about the border broadly.
Well, he was pissed because Donald Trump knows our history and knows that this is what was done with slaves back in the...
it's like the reverse freedom rides.
Antebellum era, and doesn't like Ron DeSantis taking his shtick. But the interesting thing is that I don't think that DeSantis really contemplated that anybody was going to look into this. There is a lawsuit that's being filed, the class action lawsuit, based on, again, you file these civil cases based upon existing statutes. But there are other questions, and they are mounting, and he doesn't seem to have a good answer for them. Here is Ron DeSantis. I don't even know how to characterize this answer with a very, very incoherent, weak T answer as to why did you basically find these Venezuelan immigrants, not illegal, incidentally, we'll go over that again after this clip, in Texas and fly them to Florida to make your point that you don't want them in Florida. All right, pause it. Hold on for 1 second. I should just say, if you can't hear that, the questioner was asking that it's been confirmed that Florida is spending $1 million in taxpayer dollars to fly a plane, I think she said from Texas, again, to Delaware. Ostensibly, they want to do this stunt in front of Joe Biden's house because this is what DeSantis thinks that tax dollars are meant to do these I own the lib stunts. And frankly, I mean, for these immigrants, it's like they're winning the lottery because they're actually getting more care in these states as opposed to what you would see, like, let's say, I guess in Florida. But here he is answering that.
From that, I can't.
And then the second question, why take immigrants from Texas rather than the illegal immigrants in Florida and deal with the relocation?
Well, we do both. So we've had interdiction in the Panhandle. The problem is we're not seeing mass movements of them into Florida. So you end up with a car with maybe 2, and if we know that that's illegal and there's someone that's kind of smuggling, then committing crime, then you can do arrest. There have been drug seizures, but that's not effective enough to stop the mass migration, but it's just coming in onesie-twosies. So we've had people on the border for last summer. We've done a lot of intelligence, and everyone down there will say between 1/3 and 40% of the people coming across are seeking to end up in Florida. And so we have to go and figure out, okay, who are those people likely to be? And if you can do it at the source and divert to sanctuary jurisdictions, the chance they end up in Florida is much less. And the thing is, with the sanctuary, the idea
All right, pause it. Let me just like interpret what he. Well, I don't interpret. He's asked, why did you have to find immigrants in Texas? Now, let's also be clear. These are asylum seekers. They are not illegal. The law in the United States says when those refugee seekers step on U.S. territory and turn themselves in, they are now in the legal process. They may not be citizens, but they are legal here in the same way, or a slightly different way, but broadly speaking, in the same way that, like, someone flies over from, I don't know, some country in Asia or Middle East or Europe, flies here. They're not citizens, but they're legal. They're legal. They're within a process. They have to leave after a certain period of time. There are certain things that they need to, deal with. These people are legal. They have court dates. He's arguing that they have people on the ground in Texas. And it's unclear whether these are state employees, whether they are contracted out, but they're gathering intel on so-called illegals who are migrating to Florida.
Onesie twosies.
In onesies, twosies.
Meaning, like, they're just mini caravans, right? No longer caravans of migrants. It's just people arriving in cars. So mini.
They spread them out. Of course. 30 to 40%, he says, of all the people across the border are coming into Florida in twosies and onesies.
Onesie twosies.
Onesie twosies. And he is now claiming that what they do is interdict there and then send them to sanctuary states, which is, if those 50 Venezuelan refugees constitute even anything close to 30 or 40% of people who come across the border, then I don't understand what the issue is. You're saying, like,
yeah, what is the issue if they're going to these sanctuary cities? This is the exact nature of the stunt that you pulled off, which is like, wouldn't you like it if they came to your area? But you're saying that that's already happening.
Well, he's claiming that they have some type of major operation that is somehow stopping these people before they get, like, a pre-crime in his mind, before they get to Florida, and sending them other places, which of course is demonstrably untrue. So he is really trying hard here not to answer the question, who was on the ground, who was paying for them on the ground, how long have they been there, why are they there, and why did you pull this stunt this way? You can't find any refugees in Florida. You can't find any asylum seekers in Florida. You can't find any undocumented immigrants in Florida. I don't understand what the problem is. Oh, he only comes in onesies and twosies. All right, but continue.
Because they have more benefits or whatever they do, that people will be able to stick. And so that's why you're doing it. If I could do it all in Florida, I would. But if we just ignore the source, then you're going to have people trickling in, 5, 10 a day, 20 a day. I don't know. But there's no way you can possibly track all of that because it's on such a small scale. Whereas if you know there's maybe 1,000 people down there and a lot of them say in Florida, well, you could say, well, hey, wait a minute, here's a sanctuary jurisdiction, be able to provide the transport. So if that's what you want to do, you do. And I think that that's much more effective than just trying to send 1 or 2 out at a time. Also point out, we have a whole infrastructure in place now because of what the legislature did. So it's not just flights. We had ground. We have other things that we can do. And I'll tell you this, it's already made more of an impact than anyone thought it could possibly make. But we're going to continue to make more of an impact. And I think that at the end of the day, what we're doing is not the ultimate solution. I think it's opening people's eyes to the solution, which is, let's have a secure border. Let's have remain in Mexico. Let's take the cartels seriously, and let's get with the program.
All right, I don't want to hear it. Okay, so he's arguing that there's already a significant infrastructure that Florida has in Texas that is shipping these people by, it sounds like by car and truck and plane and who knows, maybe rail to sanctuary states. And I would be curious as to what the data is on like how effective this program has been.
I'd be
for
curious
Florida.
too about where that funding is coming from. He has evaded that question as well. Is this coming from the taxpayers in Florida that are paying for these secret ops and agents that are roaming around Texas who are putting migrants into sanctuary cities?
If it's already making a big difference in Florida, I mean, we got to be talking about thousands, tens of thousands, right? I mean, how many, like, why isn't he bragging about this? What an amazing, innovative program. I wonder if Glenn Abbott has signed off on this too. Does Texas allow there to be like a mini Florida operation going on there? This is all bullshit. And I think the thing that he's having a problem with is he's starting to realize, like, maybe some of this press is not going to let go of this.
He doesn't have the stuff. Like, I'm becoming increasingly convinced that this guy is in over his head in terms of just trying to go to the next thing that's going to be a stunt that appeals to the Republican primary voter. And he's burning out quickly. Like, when he is met with the smallest amount of scrutiny, he folds. So I don't know. He should be a little bit worried about his primary chances.
Kilgore Trout on Twitter has a funny tweet. My plan to own the libs by dropping my kidnapped victims off on Cutthroat Lawyer Island is going exactly as planned.
Exactly. We should say, like, multiple people have already IM'd us about his use of the ultimate solution for immigrants. That's an interesting turn of phrase. I wonder... just
does he mean granting them amnesty en masse in the state of Florida because it works out for me politically? Oh, wait.
Ultimate solution is like the last solution. It's almost like the final solution. I'm sure it's just a. But again, reminder: these people are asylum seekers. They are legal. They are legal. I mean, I don't think you refer to anybody as being illegal when seniors buy drugs in Canada because it's cheaper. We don't refer to them as illegal seniors because they did something that was when people speed, get a ticket. I don't refer to them as illegal drivers. But these folks are well within their rights and are trying to do the right thing by going to their court cases. And of course, DeSantis somehow, his Operation Florida in Texas interdiction has was successful, at least for these 50 people. All right. Do we need to take a quick break? We do? Okay. Just a reminder, folks, this program relies on you for its very existence. You can help this show survive and thrive by becoming a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half free of commercials too. And the fun half. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. Just Coffee is a movement partner. Great co-op. They're very, very helpful to their suppliers, farms in Mexico and in Africa. So check them out. And you can buy the Majority Report blend. There's other blends you can get too that I enjoy, but the Majority Report blend is always a staple. Definitely want to get that one. All right, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be talking to Jonah Furman. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program somebody who I've been reading for quite a while. I follow you on Twitter as well. Jonah Furman of Labor Notes. He's the author of Who Gets the Bird, a newsletter on Substack. If you want a sense of what's going on in terms of the labor movement in this country at the moment, Jonah's Twitter feed is a great place to start. Anyways, Jonah, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so will you just back up a little bit for us in terms of what's happened with this labor strike? There was a little bit of a blip, I guess, like 45 days ago or so, where it hit the news in a sort of mainstream way, and then it punted for 30 days. Just give us some background as to how we got to where we are today, maybe up to how we got to where we are last Thursday. With the railway strike.
Sure. Yeah. So what people should understand is that in this country, because of strikes in the 19th century, railroads are covered under different law, which uses the federal government a lot more. So there's all these different points where they'll be like, okay, 30-day cooling off, kick it to the federal government, advisory board, mediators, all these things. So these negotiations actually are from 2019. The contract we're talking about is a 2019 contract that has been delayed 3 years. Now, the whole process involves, bringing in mediators, bringing in recommendations. And the thing you're talking about 45 days ago in August was the Presidential Emergency Board. So this is pretty rare in rail negotiations. Usually they'll have a deal before it gets to this level. But there's part of the rail negotiations involved the president appointing a board of mediators to say, here's what we think the deal should be. You guys, the unions and the railroad companies can't agree. Here's what it should be. So that report came out. And that's where you saw this basically proposed settlement that said you're going to get money, but you're not going to get more time off, is essentially the trade-off that was made. You're going to get 24% raises, but you're not going to get any additional time off the job. Now, that turns into a vote among unions saying, okay, do you like that deal? Do you want to turn that into an actual contract? That's the strong recommendation of the government, but what do the workers think? And essentially last week, what we saw is workers taking up that deal across 13 different unions. There was a little bit of difference in different types of workers, what they thought of it, but you saw 2 of the unions reject it. 2 of the unions say, we're not even going to consider this a contract. And we got within hours of what would have been a national rail shutdown. There's more details to it, but essentially what happened last Thursday is... All
right, well, hold on. Let's stop. Sure. I want to stop there.
Yeah.
A couple of things to talk about. So we're talking about the Railway Labor Act. What other, and obviously I think people can imagine when you're talking about the 1800s, railways are central to the functioning of the country. So we understand maybe why there would be special laws passed to deal in a, not leave it up to, essentially the free market, I guess, to resolve these things. What other are there other specific sort of like silos of labor in this country that are subject to their own labor acts in some way, where the government has this type of like mediative role?
It's pretty unique. I mean, the Railway Labor Act is from before any other labor law in this country because it was such a big deal. 1877, there was huge strikes that they basically sent in the army to run the railroads. There was shootouts, things like that. For about 50 years, there was this level of unrest. So in the 20s, they do the Railway Labor Act. That only covers railroad workers and some airline workers. Other than that, like in the private sector, everybody else got their own set aside law that we're more familiar with under the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. And then, of course, in the public sector, you have more government involvement because, you have you're bargaining with the state government. Right. Yes, exactly. And those are all a patchwork. But aside from federal workers, there's no other case in which, certainly not in the private sector, where the federal government has like a stated expected role directly in negotiations on the level of like, here's the provisions we would recommend.
Okay, and so the Presidential Emergency Board, during that 30-day cooling down period, comes up with this deal. When you say time off, we're really talking about like, it's not, we want a 6-week vacation in August. It's, I'm sick. My kid's sick. My mom or dad is sick. My significant other is sick. And if I go to the doctor, I get docked pay, which you would presume like, well, we want our workers to be able to be in good health and not to get other people sick, but that's not the way it worked, right? So could you get drill down into that dynamic a little bit so that we really get a sense of that?
Is actually worse than what you said. It's not that you get docked pay. That's where the negotiations went, is can we just get docked pay? You get docked on your attendance policy, which means you're one step closer to getting fired. And you need to work continuous hours to get those points, as they call them, off of your attendance policy. In February, there was almost a strike on one of the rail lines because they instituted a new, even worse attendance policy that basically says if you miss a day, you have to work something like 6 weeks straight. Others are on call unless they're not. So when rail workers say they have 30 days off in the year, which is the number about that for most of these workers, 30 days off during the year, they're counting as if weekends, that's their weekends too. So everyone else has 2 days out of every week. So that's 104 days off a year. These workers have 30 and one other per month. So it depends exactly, but they don't have a 5-day work week.
I didn't know that.
Yes, they sit next to their phone and they say, I could get called in for a 3-day trip within 2 hours. The exact rules change. And if I miss a phone call, or if I'm at a wedding or a funeral or the birth of my child and it wasn't scheduled for this XYZ day, suddenly you're talking about getting fired. So you're not just talking about if I don't go, I can't afford it, it's a hardship. That's where that's where they got in the negotiations, is can we at least do that? Where if I miss a day for sickness or something like this, I at least don't get disciplined. But they actually are getting, disciplined and fired for taking time off for routine things like that.
So it's impossible to schedule anything in your life or be able to say, I've got a wedding, I've got a funeral, I've got something that most people take for granted that they don't, they can't miss or they don't want to miss. And it's not even a question of like, I can't afford to miss work that day. I'm just not allowed to do it and keep my job.
Yeah. It's more like I'm 25 years into this job and I'm committed and I have to, this is my career and my livelihood and I'm risking it all if something comes up. And one other wrinkle to it that people should appreciate is that one of the reasons it's coming to a head right now, it's been like this on the railroads for a long time, but in the past 5 to 10 years, they've started this new system. Basically, it's called precision scheduled railroading, but it's a new management regime that part of it is, it's just like a lot of other industries with just-in-time production and lean manufacturing, things like that are doing more with less. But literally in the past 6 years, they've cut something like 30% of the workforce on these railroads. Wow. So you can imagine what that does for scheduling. If you're on call all the time and there's nobody else to cover, suddenly this is why they need more draconian attendance policies, because they've cut everybody out. Plus,
is there 30% less rail activity?
There's much more, right? The pandemic, we know from people being home, things are getting shipped more than people going out. Just like we saw parcel delivery go way up at Amazon and UPS, that's all the supply chain. So all the stresses on the supply chain is totally separate from this huge explicit cut in the workforce. One of the big fights is they're trying to go to one-man crews, which basically means you're driving a train that is like 3 miles long. And currently you have to have 2 people on that train at least. So, if someone, God forbid, passes out, there's someone still driving this extremely dangerous vehicle. They've been trying for years to go to one-man crews just because they want to cut half the people they have to pay, regardless of how inefficient that is, dangerous that is, just like unthinkable that you would have just one guy driving a 4-mile train that can kill people and does. One thing people didn't appreciate is that last week during the negotiations, 2 rail workers were killed in a derailment. Like, this is people's lives. It's not like, it's the unpaid sick days is sort of become like this, this highlight, the flagship thing, but this is a dangerous job with workers getting ground down, and not just the pandemic, but this whole management regime of the past 5 to 10 years.
And in terms of just like record profits for the rail carriers, so they're cutting the workforce to get lean and mean and putting that on the backs of workers. But they've made a ton of money over the past during that period, right?
Yeah, and huge. I mean, just like we've seen a lot of corporate America, huge stock buybacks. Warren Buffett is one of the owners of BNSF, one of the big railroads involved here. And another thing people should appreciate about sort of the profit margins here is that the railroads that we're talking about are functionally monopolies. There are 6 carriers we're talking about, but they don't overlap geographically. So BNSF is not competing with Union Pacific. They have different rail lines, and the companies they serve can't just switch to trucks and boats and planes. It's not economical, and you can't just set up a new railroad next to the existing one. So there's no competition here for these companies to stay efficient. So they decided we don't really need to be efficient because we have a huge captive chunk of the economy and businesses that need our rails, and we can just save money by cutting workers. And who's going to stop us? Literally, the only person who's going to stop them is the workers. And that's what last week and this ongoing fight is about.
When did I mean all of these railways, these rail lines? They're for the most part privately owned. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so we have this dynamic here, and it takes us to last Thursday, where the unions are brought in. I guess, I mean, I've read the reporting, Marty Walsh up until 5 a.m. or 6 a.m, or I don't know, got 15 minutes of sleep, negotiates this deal essentially to get buy-in by the 2 reluctant unions that are holding out for some form of like, really just respect of their humanity. I mean, it seems like, the union leadership signs off on it at least enough so that it can enter into another cooling off period. Is that what happens? And then, so take it from there and walk us through what happens next.
Yeah, exactly. People might have seen this term tentative agreement. This is like a union term. It basically means you have a deal between the bargaining committees involved. So the company and then the union's representatives have said, here's a deal that we think is decent enough to go to a ratification. Ratification is where you send it out to all the members and it gets voted up or down. In this case, we're talking about 13 different unions. So it is one sort of negotiation. It's all lined up time-wise, but it really is 13 separate contracts with 13 unions whose memberships have to vote 51% that we want to take this deal and get back to work. So signing the tentative agreement under this Railway Labor Act kicks the cooling off period a certain amount of time. And we actually don't know. It has not been made fully public what the date is of the next cooling off period, but we're just back where we were a month ago. The funny thing about seeing people say, it's over, there's a vote here. They could easily vote it down. One union did last week, voted down the agreement. 2 unions actually voted down the agreement last week. So they could easily vote it down and we get to the next cooling off period and suddenly we're at a standoff again. I think there's reasons they wanted to kick it, but this thing is very much even not even like, you hope the workers will hold out for more, nothing like that. It's just literally the process has not come to its end. And there's a lot of reasons to think that at least one of these 13 unions is going to vote no and hit their deadline. And then who knows what the next settlement is.
I mean, they wanted to punt this to the other side of the election. I mean, that was the primary. What is the leverage that the U.S. has, the federal government has in terms of the railway operators? In other words, it seems to me like I could make a pretty strong case. I don't know, nobody's asking me to, but we sort of need those railways. Like eminent domain, it seems to me a pretty good argument that we need those railways, particularly if we're going to upgrade our rail system in this country. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but, no better time than the present. Is that something like, that, I don't know, Marty Walsh could say, like, here's Pete Buttigieg. I know this is fantastical based upon on who we're talking about, but theoretically, couldn't somebody in the room say, like, Jesus, maybe what we just need to do is eminent domain and get these railway lines and start charging you guys a fee for running on these lines, because this is national security. I mean, there's a reason why we have a Railway Labor Act and we don't have a, Chuck E. Cheese Labor Act or something.
Yes, and there's also a reason why the federal government owns the U.S. Postal Service and doesn't let Warren Buffett own it. I think that's totally right. And if you look at other countries, really far short of radical governments have maintained that rail lines just fall under this national security, national interest thing. That should totally be on the table. I will say there's other options the federal government has here. So under the Rail Labor Act, it's expected that if we get to a strike or a work stoppage, Congress is, unlike in almost any other union negotiation, is empowered to step in and say, you're going back to work, the lockout is over, the strike is over, and here are the terms under which you're going back. Now, last week, we saw the GOP put forward this bill saying, you're going back under the Presidential Emergency Board deal, which they know the workers can't live with. But they love it because it's Joe Biden's deal, and they're the GOP, so they get to say, Joe Biden said this is your deal. Now, there's no reason Congress, you saw Bernie, he stood up and basically filibustered that bill getting passed and said, these workers need paid sick day, their health care is unaffordable, various issues they have. There's no reason Congress couldn't have a bill that says, okay, if there's a lockout, the workers are going back with, free health care, with paid sick days, with cost of living adjustments. That's totally doable legally, structurally. It would be totally in line with what we understand the Railway Labor Act to be about, which Congress intervenes at the end. So the fact that nobody's talked about that or talked about, like you're saying, at least some receivership, trusteeship over these companies that seriously cannot seem to run a rail line. I mean, you look at freight shipment times, look at the supply chain. It's not just manufacturing, it's also distribution. You cut all your workers, you can't get stuff there on time. So these options are politically on the table. They're not really that fantastical, but there has not been a lot of champions out there saying, let's try it.
Have you heard anything from anybody out of maybe Sanders' office or somebody else that is prepping a bill like this? Because from reading your reporting, there seems to be at least some sentiment amongst some of the workers and the union folk that we should kick this to Congress. I mean, if they do that, let's say during the lame duck period, when the Democrats, if there's a strike, let's say, 3 weeks before Christmas, when everybody's waiting for their presents to show up, and there's a bill offered by Democrats to do a lot of what you say, and Republicans are the ones standing in front of it and blocking everybody from getting their Christmas presents because they don't want workers to be able to go to a funeral or take care of their sick kids. To me, that sounds like a fairly good situation to be in politically.
Yeah, I mean, the extent of what we've seen is Bernie Sanders put out a statement saying, whatever the rail workers decide, I'll have their back. And that has some credibility for the way that he stopped, from insider reports, it seems like his intervention really did stop them from imposing that deal. A lot of what you're talking about is sort of who gets the blame for a stoppage and who's going to, whose side will Congress intervene on, if anything. I think if you talk to rail workers, their hope was not that Congress is going to have a bill that fixes all their problems or nationalize the railroads or fix all these issues. But they were hoping at least, if nothing else, Congress would stay out of it and let the railroads feel the economic pain. They talk a lot about the harm it would do to the U.S. economy, and that's true, but it would also do a lot of harm to Warren Buffett and the people who own these companies if there was a strike. Traditionally, that's how a strike works, right? The workers shut it down, the owners feel economic pain and feel like they have to come back to the table with something more meaningful. So, I think the lowest bar is people in Congress saying, we're not going to intervene, we're not going to help the railroad companies get out of this with a deal that they prefer. And the higher bar is saying, why not have legislation saying paid sick days for railroad workers? Why not have legislation saying cost of living adjustments for anyone in the supply chain? However you want to slice it, there's certain baseline demands here that are clearly in the national interest. We just haven't seen people come out and champion it. And meanwhile, the union leadership, they're in a position where they're trying to pass a ratification vote. So there's not one union leader you can go to and say, what would you really, really like? They're trying to get through this crisis moment themselves too. So it's really the rank and file members who I've heard have been calling their Congress people saying, can you do a cost of living adjustment bill? Can you do a free healthcare bill for rail workers? Can you do even just 5 paid sick days? But there's really a question of who's going to step up and be courageous enough to say, we are intervening. We're intervening for the workers. It's supposed to be the Democratic Party is the working class party, so this would be a great way to show it.
All right. One more quick question. Or I guess maybe this is a two-parter. What is the strength of, and I know there's 12 unions, so maybe there's not one answer for this, but in terms of like strike funds, in terms of solidarity, in terms of all the assets you would need to enter into a, I don't think would be a prolonged strike because there's so much money being lost by these railway barons, essentially. But how how are the assets in terms of the durability of that solidarity and their capacity to stay out on strike in terms of these unions? Again, I know there's 12 unions, so it might be hard to make a blanket assessment. And also relative the relationships between the rank and file and the leadership. Give me a sense of or give us a sense of that, I guess.
Yeah, well, on strike funds and things like that, I don't think there's a universe in which this is a long strike. I think these workers, you can look at 92, 91 is the last time we had any rail disruptions. We're talking about less than a few days until Congress says this has to end under a better deal. So I don't think people are, concerned with a long strike fund. There is a lot of, despite the division, there's some inspiring shows of solidarity among these workers. So, you had one union that had a deal set and said, well, if the other union doesn't get it, we're not going to cross the picket line. We're not going to work. Something you should also understand is that, in 92, the last time there was a shutdown, it was one union on one rail line that struck, which shut down the whole system because it's all interconnected operationally. So, I do think there's an opening here for, even if one of the smaller unions, 5,000 members, they have, say half the people vote and 1,500 of them vote no. We're looking at a serious, there's the math here is pretty easy for this deal not to go through. It's harder to see how it does get ratified. And looking at where workers were at before the Marty Walsh deal, before the unpaid sick time and the small tweaks they made, you had internal polls from some of these unions saying 80% of the members were ready to vote no, 90% wanted to strike. So the question, when I look at it, I'm just thinking, do these tweaks, some unpaid sick time that's really unclear, does that really move it 20, 30 points on the vote? Nice. It's hard to imagine. And at this point, a lot of workers I talk to are just saying, look, it's been 3 years of buildup on this. It's been 20 years of working this job. This was our moment. And I'm not ready to say we got everything that we can right now. It reminds me of talking to people at John Deere last year and other strikes where they repeatedly vote down agreements because they feel this is sort of their one shot. And if they sign a deal, it's 5 years until the next contract expiration is up. Who knows what conditions will be like.
And who knows who the administration will be at that time, too. You might lose some leverage there. Like you say, we don't know how long the cooling off period is. My bet is it's past November 8th, but probably not much past November 8th. So I suspect we're going to want to talk to you again relatively soon. In the meantime, folks should check out your Twitter feed and labor notes and your Substack, Who Gets the Bird. Thank you so much, Jonah. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, Emma is going to interview Seth Harp, investigative reporter and contributing editor at Rolling Stone magazine, about his piece on the problem with overdoses at Fort Bragg. I'm going to go off and deal with sick child stuff, but I will be back after that interview, and just got to make a couple phone calls and make sure that no one has burned down any places.
Okay, good.
We'll be right back after this.
We are back, and we are joined now by Seth Harp, investigative reporter and contributing editor at Rolling Stone, whose piece on Fort Bragg is like really just a must-read for everybody. Seth, thanks so much for being here today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you begin your piece kind of setting the scene of two men who were killed by gunshots outside of Fort Bragg. And I mean, the numbers are just startling in terms of how many deaths have piled up since the beginning of 2020. What led you to looking into this, and what, I guess, take us to the beginning of your piece where you initially set that scene?
Yeah, it was that double murder that you just referred to that initially brought me to the story of Fort Bragg, the larger story of Fort Bragg. The murder of Billy Levine and Timothy Dumas. That actually happened in December 2020. Last time I came on y'all's show, I talked a bit about that and some other murders that seem to be linked to drug trafficking by elite soldiers at Fort Bragg. And at that time, I mentioned that there had been a large number of deaths of Fort Bragg soldiers in general. So aside from the murders, there have been at least 44 deaths at Fort Bragg among soldiers that year in 2020. And I told you all about how I was trying to figure out exactly what was going on there, what was behind such a high body count. Now, come to find out here almost a full year later with the latest piece, the total number of soldiers that have died at Fort Bragg over a 2-year time period from 2020 to 2021 was 109, and 105 of those occurred stateside, whereas only 4 of them took place in overseas combat operations. And the latest piece I wrote for Rolling Stone really focuses on one of the major leading causes of death there, which is accidental drug overdoses, which is pretty obviously linked to the prior topic, which is a lot of the drug crime that was going on in Fort Bragg.
So set the stage too for just what Fort Bragg is for our audience in terms of like its role in some of the special ops bureaucracy, and just how essentially there's a lot of like elite military training that happens there, and with that comes a ton of secrecy, which I'm sure was a major obstacle in your reporting on this. So for our audience, what is Fort Bragg and what goes on there in terms of training?
Yeah, totally. I described it in the piece as the beating heart of the U.S. Global Special Operations Complex. Fort Bragg is not just any Army base. It's the Army's most important installation, probably the most important military installation in the United States. It's the home of the Airborne Corps, the Green Berets, Special Forces, and also JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command, which is a covert military within the military that since 9/11 has become by far the most powerful combatant command in the entire Pentagon. Has enormous autonomy and global reach and power. It's based there at Fort Bragg. That's where its headquarters is a compound within the compound there. And I'm not sure that most people who are unfamiliar with these issues are really aware of the transformation of the military over the last 20 years, over this component of the military, into something more like an intelligence agency than what we would think of as a traditional Army Special Forces unit. That really is just, hitters that follow orders, that go out and, kick down doors and raid compounds. That JSOC does a lot more than that. I was just talking to a source yesterday who was a civilian employee for Delta Force, which is the Army component of JSOC. She was talking about her job was to create cover identities for operators in Delta Force. So she would make, fake license plates, fake driver's licenses, and get fake passports. Of course, not fake; they're all real. They're actually issued by these agencies or by these offices of the United States or states. So they're official documents, but they're fictitious, and they would use these documents to do missions that are totally covert. So you're not talking about guys wearing uniforms and carrying guns. This person that I spoke to yesterday mentioned operations in China and in Israel in particular. So that's just to name 2 examples of countries where you have undercover active duty U.S. military members going and doing intelligence collections operations covertly without the knowledge of those countries, China or Israel, and of course without the knowledge of the U.S. public. So that's the kind of thing that goes on at Fort Bragg, which makes the endemic drug crime there all the more alarming, I think.
And also just lacking in terms of any oversight, not just from the outside from reporting, but the budget is classified, which I was not aware of, and it's expensive to train these officers there and these soldiers there, and yet there's quite very little sunlight on what happens, and so it makes the deaths and the clear homicides impossible to really kind of get to the bottom of, but also this burgeoning drug crime that you've done reporting on.
Yeah, we American citizens not authorized to know how much JSOC cost us. Also not authorized to know what countries JSOC is operating in, whether they're doing covert wars in countries like the Philippines or Mali or Somalia, Yemen. We're not authorized to know anything about that, so don't ask. That's the U.S. government position, and if that's news to you, you should probably get in a time machine, go back to about 2001, because this has been going on for all of these years, kind of underneath the radar.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when you think about like post 9/11 special ops, it probably all originates, or much of it originates from here. So I want to get into the drug overdose piece, but just to set the stage a little bit more for why there were so many deaths. Your initial reporting on this spoke about not just homicides or killings, beheadings that were kind of swept under the rug, but this was all within the context of a large drug usage kind of ring, trafficking ring that was already in existence, and there was a lot of intense drug use, wide drug use under a lot of secrecy at Fort Bragg. So talk about that.
Yeah, all of those things. To be clear, I'm not alleging like a dark alliance type thing where the U.S. Army Special Forces is trafficking cocaine from Colombia or wherever to the United States. I don't think that's happening. I don't see why that would be happening, because they have all the money that they could possibly want. So why would they need to engage in that kind of thing? But I do think that it's more and more the kind of thing that various Green Berets, also Navy SEALs, have been getting into more and more over the past 5 years or so. I said, I think it's really not my opinion. There's been at least a half dozen cases of current or former Green Berets or Navy SEALs who have not just been charged with, but actually either convicted or pleaded guilty to heavy duty trafficking charges since about 2015. And there are cases where they never got to anywhere near a courtroom, like the case of Billy Levine, who was found shot to death outside of Fort Bragg. Also, Timothy Dumas. We'll never figure out exactly what they were up to. The other beheading case you mentioned of Enrique Roman Martinez, I recently acquired CID's investigative file into that, which makes it clear, as my initial reporting suggested or strongly implied, whatever happened, it had something to do with those soldiers' distribution of LSD in Fort Bragg, some kind of dispute over their LSD distribution activities there. So this kind of thing really pervades Fort Bragg. By the base's own admission, drug crime was up 100% in 2021 or 2020. And to me, it's very indicative of kind of institutional breakdown in good order and discipline at Fort Bragg after 20 years of forever war, in which the Fort Bragg units have been the ones that have been deployed over and over to Afghanistan, over and over to Iraq. It's always the 82nd Airborne that the president goes to, if not, the 5th Group or the 7th Group or JSOC. It's one of these formations. Inevitably, most recently, the evacuation of the Kabul airport was done by the 82nd. Last soldier to die in Afghanistan was a member of the 82nd, and once again, they were deployed when the war in Ukraine started to backstop NATO forces over there in Poland. 5,000 Fort Bragg soldiers from the 82nd went over there. That's all to say nothing of what the Green Berets continue to do in countries like Iraq, Syria, and of course what JSOC is doing, which we don't get to know because it's all classified. So I see it all as part of the same phenomenon. Drugs allow soldiers and operators to work longer hours with less sleep, with less food, it's also very, people turn to drug. People who have been traumatized, whether it's from killing other human beings or seeing people killed, often will turn to drugs to mediate to medicate self-medicate, auto-medicate the intense anxiety and depression that is associated with PTSD. So it's all part of the same really ugly and unfortunate picture in my view.
Yeah, I mean it's the cycle of trauma, and the reality is that if there is more sunlight on what's happening at Fort Bragg or what that money is going towards, then there's going to be larger understanding that, like, actually we are inflicting immense trauma on our own soldiers through these forever wars and through these programs. That, I mean, the numbers are staggering in terms of these fentanyl overdoses and deaths as a result of drugs. Just talk about the people that you spoke with and what they've said about how their family and friends have turned to drugs just to deal with the trauma that they've endured over the past, I don't know how many decades of service, 2 decades.
Well, it's worth splitting up, two groups of types of soldiers in this context. And the first is kind of what we're talking about before, guys in their 30s or even their 40s who are operators, who are Green Berets, who have done many deployments, sometimes over a dozen deployments. A lot of those guys also use drugs, not just for mediating trauma, but because in the Army, because so many resources and privileges have been heaped on the special forces and the special operations over the last few decades, that they kind of live like rock star lifestyles in places like Fayetteville, which is the big military town right by Fort Bragg. There's a ton of partying going on. Soldiers like to drink. That's hardly groundbreaking news, but the use of cocaine in particular as a party drug or something that folks take when they're drinking, that's really on the rise in special operations and kind of low key that most folks are not culturally attuned to. But it's also the same thing in the Navy SEALs. Lots of reports over the last few years of SEALs doing hard drugs. And not just, we're not talking about guys drinking beer and smoking weed, talking about heroin, crack cocaine, MDMA, those kind of things, using on a regular basis. So that's one component of it. And another component of it that I reported on is a bit different. We're talking about the 82nd Airborne, which is conventional Army, although it's airborne, it's conventional Army. So you have a lot of young soldiers who are 18, 19, 20 years old. And what I've reported on going on with that population is a lot of fentanyl overdoses. And to answer your question, I've interviewed family members of soldiers who have died at Fort Bragg from fentanyl overdoses. Many of whom say that their son, it's usually their son, in some cases their brother, had no history of drug use at all, and was dead within a year of being stationed at Fort Bragg. So some questions when I hear cases like that, which include, by the way, talking about the case of Matthew Disney, talking about the case of Joshua Diamond, Zachary Bracken, just to name a few of young soldiers who have died and whose families have interviewed. And they say that that none of those men had any history of drug use before they got to Fort Bragg. So what I like to know is, one, where did they get the fentanyl that killed them? Did they get it from another soldier? And also, was this something that they were doing before they got to Fort Bragg? Because or was it something that developed afterwards? Because they're literally in the custody of the U.S. government, and we're owed some kind of answer when people who are active duty soldiers die. And so far, we haven't gotten anything remotely like some kind of answer, even a response from the Army.
What's the relationship between local law enforcement in Fayetteville and how their ability to investigate any of the potential crimes coming out of Fort Bragg, which is like in their backyard, but I'd imagine they get big-footed quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, what's the role of local law enforcement there? To cover up crimes? I don't know. They don't solve a lot of them, that's for sure. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. Sometimes they carry out busts. They busted a master sergeant in the 82nd named Martin Acevedo III, heavy-duty cocaine trafficking charges, caught him with a bunch of firearms, coke, and cash at his house. So you do see busts like that. However, in a lot of other cases, it's very clear that, especially when the soldier concerned is a member of an elite unit and they could potentially embarrass an organization like JSOC or the First Special Forces Command, those charges just disappear. I mean, you don't see in Cumberland County, Hope County, all the other counties around Fort Bragg, you will not see a Delta Force operator come up on charges. It doesn't matter what he did. It doesn't matter if he rammed his car while he was driving drunk into a bunch of teenagers and fled on foot, like a Delta operator named Lee Ampola did earlier this year. Those charges, don't know what happened to those. All this is allegedly, by the way, because it's just an arrest report that I'm going off of. But those charges just went away. You know, Billy Levine committed a string of crimes around, allegedly committed a string of crimes around Fayetteville. 5 separate felonies he was arrested for, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and murder, first-degree murder. He was arrested for that. All those charges disappear. Cristobal Lopez Vallejo, arrested for second-degree rape. He's another Delta operator. All these guys I mentioned are Delta operators. Once again, those charges ultimately disappeared from the Cumberland County criminal docket. So I don't think you can ever see a case where you're going to find a man who served in Delta Force as an operator ends up in a courtroom and being actually prosecuted. I've never seen a case like that.
I mean, did they not collect any evidence in some of these cases? It seems like so clear, right? In your piece from 2021, this was a homicide, and yet it seems like there was not any testimony taken, any physical evidence collected. I mean, how is that even possible?
I don't know what the tenor of the conversations were that took place behind closed doors, but I don't think you would see the same thing if it was just a regular Joe who was drunk and high, out of his mind on 4 different substances, shoots and kills a guy, his best friend, for no apparent reason with his personal firearm. Comes up with this cockamamie story about how his buddy came at him with a screwdriver and he had to do it with self-defense. And that's all that was good enough for the detectives in Cumberland County. That was good enough for Billy West, who's the DA of Cumberland County. Charges were dismissed that same night. Billy Levine was never even drug tested. And as the sister of the victim in that homicide told me, if they had done a proper investigation, all the bodies and drugs that were associated with Levine could have been avoided.
It just really is just jarring. And to zoom out a little bit, these stories that come out of Fort Bragg really do seem to be. It's almost our war on terror in a nutshell, right? Where a complete lack of oversight for special operations, funding that is endless and seems to just like be unencumbered by any stories of brutality or murder or cruelty that come out of these places. And yet, it seems that the president has the authority, if he wanted to, if this reporting was more highlighted, to alter that. But like once these systems of shadowy power are created, it's like they're unencumbered, and it's really difficult for there to be any outside pressure to end them because they become organisms unto themselves.
I couldn't agree more. It's not clear who's exercising oversight over JSOC now. I mean, when it first was exponentially increased to have enormous power and funding and global reach under the Bush administration, and then later even to an even greater extent under the Obama administration, I think they were actively utilizing the unit in all kinds of different ways and knew more or less what kind of operations were going on. But they cut the regular military chain of command out of they cut the regular Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense out of the chain of command. So JSOC effectively answers directly to the president. And that's constitutionally problematic in a lot of ways. That ship, of course, has sailed. We just live in a country now where the president has his own personal covert military to call on. But to what extent the Biden administration is actually exercising oversight over JSOC, that's a good question. I don't really have any insight into that. Honestly, to me, they seem pretty checked out, and who knows what's going on behind the scenes. What I know, what I report on is weird stuff that happens around Fort Bragg where it's never fully explained, but just seems highly suggestive and suspicious, for lack of a better word. I mean, just less than a month ago, or perhaps a month ago, a contract pilot for Delta Force named Charles Crooks fell out of a plane into someone's suburban backyard in Fayetteville. Just a dead body fell out, or a man's body fell out of the sky, hit their backyard, and he died. Now, he was a contract pilot, a civilian contract pilot for USASOC, which is the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, probably for Delta Force. And there's no clear explanation of how he fell or jumped, is the language that you'll see in reporting around this at all. And the official story, or the story that authorities seem to be going with, at least initially, is that he, mid-flight, became upset over something, felt sick, and needed some fresh air. And to me, that is not a very satisfactory explanation at all.
No.
And just a few years before this, another Delta Force contract pilot, a man named Tim Thacker, was arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison for trafficking methamphetamine in North Carolina. The Justice Department describes him as a major methamphetamine kingpin, which is a statutory designation that they applied to Tim Thacker, and gave him 40 years in federal prison. And he was a lifelong contract pilot for Delta Force who was well enmeshed in the unit, who grew up in the unit because his father was a legendary Green Beret named Gene Thacker, who himself was accused of cocaine trafficking back in the 1980s, but was acquitted when all of his teammates took the stand and testified to the uprightness of his character. So these threads you can trace back many years in terms of lawlessness and drug trafficking in the Green Berets. But we've certainly seen an acceleration in what I would describe as, a lot of smoke around this. So it's hard to find the actual fire itself because it's very difficult to get solid factual reporting on these units because they don't talk to the press. The Army has no comment. JSOC has no comment. And the police do nothing to investigate these cases. They just swoop in, seize the evidence, tell everyone they're investigating, and you never hear another word breathed about the case ever again.
And lastly, I mean, another big picture theme here is not just the failure and the immense cloud of sadness and that the war on terror has created, and the trauma that it inflicts on people through others. It's generational trauma. This is also just the failure of the war on drugs that this exemplifies, and how essentially just because of this lack of oversight, these things have been able to run rampant. And I would imagine that, and you can just confirm or deny this, that people in Fayetteville and the surrounding areas and law enforcement are aware of the integration between some of these folks and the drug trafficking rings, but that it's almost just like it's good business to a degree to let it slide.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I always tell folks that the war in Mexico ought to be lumped in the same sentence with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, because it started right around the same time. So to take it back even one step before that, there was this sort of brief window in the 1990s when the U.S. military and the federal government were kind of adrift because they really need an external enemy to oppose. That's the way that our government kind of functions. Everything is always directed towards the latest foreign boogeyman du jour, where everything is geared around opposing that, some kind of war paradigm we need in order to function in our political economy. And after the Cold War, when Russia was no longer available to serve that role, there was a time when they tried to do the war on drugs was going to be the big national security paradigm around which everything else was organized. Now, that didn't really work very well. It didn't really test well with market audiences, so to speak. It just wasn't a great paradigm. They quickly found a much, much better one in the war on terror after 2001. But the war on drugs continued apace. It wasn't as if they stopped doing that. And where it really accelerated was in Mexico around 2005 to 2010. Within that window, but certainly starting with the Merida Initiative in 2008, which George W. Bush pressured, the George W. Bush administration pressured the government of Mexico to fully militarize its conflict against the cartels and to fight drug trafficking cartels with overt military force. Right around the same time, they were ramping up the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's why I say they ought to be considered together, even though, of course, this conflict in Mexico was fought with Mexican troops rather than with American troops. And the result, like in Iraq, like in Afghanistan, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent people while accomplishing zero of the United States' stated objectives in those conflicts. So what we're seeing at Fort Bragg now, I think, can be understood as the kind of collapse and failure, not just of the terror wars, not just of the post 9/11 wars, but also the war on drugs, and are all collapsing back and blowing back stateside in that community in Fayetteville, which is both steeped in trauma and insulated from accountability.
Well, Seth Harp, investigative reporter and contributing editor at Rolling Stone. You can read both of his pieces, but the more recent one from this month is entitled "These Kids Are Dying: Inside the Overdose Crisis Sweeping Fort Bragg." Seth, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, I believe, unless we aren't. Oh, hi.
Hey, I'm back.
Oh.
We're going to head into the fun half, and I'm going to be doing I guess a debate with writer Brad Palumbo, journalist and policy correspondent at the Foundation for Economic Education, where he is going to school me on the reasons why Joe Biden shouldn't have forgiven any student debt and shouldn't forgive any more in the future. In the meantime, head into the fun half. We're going to take some IMs, I would imagine, after that. I don't know if we'll have time for phone calls. We'll see. I'll try and keep it into a reasonable amount of time. I will do my best. But just a reminder, your support makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Also, the AM Quickie. Get the headline news in your email box every day from a left perspective. amquickie.com. Sign up. It is free at the moment. Emma, ESVN this week?
Yes. Tomorrow, Bradley and I will be giving our picks for week 3 when we had a pretty... I went undefeated in week 1, not so much last week. Bradley had 2 bad
I was
weeks.
defeated this past week.
Yeah, tough week for us, but we look to bounce back. We'll be giving our best picks, 3 locks each for the weekend on Thursday at 4 p.m. on the Majority Report channel. But you can also check out our episode from earlier this week where we talked about the WNBA championship, what the heck is going on with Tom Brady. Is it right how he treats his teammates despite, his prowess in the culture? And also just recapping both New York teams winning and more over the weekend. Check that out, and please rate us 5 stars on Apple iTunes and Spotify if you can do that. ESVN, check us out.
Matt!
Last night on Left Reckoning, talked to GP Jacob about rent control policies in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and also in the post-game talked a little bit about some early Glenn Greenwald blogs that might suggest that his recent jumping on Twitter to gloat over the migrants traffic to Martha's Vineyard might be more of a return to form for him on those issues. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get that.
All right, we're going to head into the fun half. See you there. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's
talking
Oh,
for a
wow.
second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? This me?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go throw up.
Libertarians. They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Mac.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35. 501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
Call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about
Yeah.
you is just like every day, all day, like
Yeah.
everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Brad Palumbo. He is a journalist and policy correspondent, the Foundation for Economic Education. Brad, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So now, Brad, you reached out to me, I think it was on Twitter, and wanted to have a debate about student debt forgiveness. This was before Biden made his announcement. Still relevant as to whether or not it's a good idea or whether there should be more of this. And so we figured let's do this. So let me just, before we get into the specifics about this, let me just ask you just a couple of questions. These are just straightforward that I want to just get a sense of, like,
Sure.
Give people a sense of, like, what your perspective is on this. Are you for the idea of free college at all?
No.
No idea.
No.
Okay. And what about, like, free pre-K education in this country? Like preschool, pre-K?
I've done a lot of work on higher ed policy. I can't say I've given universal pre-K fair scrutiny to weigh in.
But what about free K through 12 education?
Yes, I believe in school choice, but I do believe in taxpayer funding for K-12 education.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Because if you had said no, then, like, there's no point. Obviously.
I know you've had some debates and conversations with anarcho-capitalists. I'm not an anarchist.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to, no, there's some libertarians out there who I think would argue against state subsidized K through 12 education. So, I just wanted to get that out of the way, because if we did this for a half hour and you didn't believe in any free education, I think it would certainly color this. Okay, so what is so why don't you lay out your argument as to why we shouldn't have any student debt relief?
Well, I think I'll start by acknowledging college is way too expensive, and we can talk about the reasons why. But I think that student debt cancellation, it really means debt transfer to the taxpayers. And I think it's fundamentally immoral to make other people pay. It feels like these days that everybody goes to college, but actually only 1 in 3 Americans over age 25 has a bachelor's degree. They hold almost all of the student debt. And they also happen to earn a lot more on average. That's why people go to college. So when you ease a burden from them by transferring it on to the general public who all pay taxes, you're essentially comforting a relatively affluent slice of society. Not everybody is, but a better off slice of society at the expense of taxpayers in part who didn't even go to college. So I think it's pretty unfair as a matter of policy. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. It doesn't solve any of the problems. And yeah, that's kind of the general gist of the position.
Okay, let me start with saying I agree with you. It is a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And I would like to see a free or as close to free college option in every state in the country as we can get. You know that, and I'm sure you know that the sort of suggested that college is way too expensive. That the price of college today, relative, I guess I had a figure from 1963, is 37 times higher. 37 times higher for a 4-year college than in 1963. And just to give put that into context, $1,000 in 1963 would be worth, with inflation, $9,700 today, $9,700. So you've got the price of college has increased four times more or less than inflation has over the course of the past 60 years. Let's just call it 59, I think. So I agree with you in terms of the Band-Aid on a bullet hole. In terms of the morality of having taxpayers pay for debt relief in some fashion, we do that every day. And we don't just do it for college students, we do it for people who buy homes, which of course is, I think, statistically even more of higher income people than those who have student debt relief, because we know that about 35% of those people, even though you're talking averages, you're not talking actual means, you're not talking individuals, 35% of them never get a college degree who have student debt. But in terms of homeowners, we give a mortgage interest deduction, which benefits.
That's not quite the same, though.
It's not this, but I mean, if I rent or I own a home, like, we encourage home ownership by giving a reduction in taxes. And that is in terms of the government, right? Which, if you look at the ledger, that means less money coming in than would otherwise come in because we give them a tax deduction.
Yes, but there's a moral difference, if I can just say, between letting people keep more, and I actually don't support the mortgage tax deduction, to be clear, but there's a pretty big moral distinction between letting people keep more of their own money and transferring money from one party to another. So I just don't think they're real. It's kind of apples and oranges.
All right. I want to get to this whole thing you keep hitting with morality because, we can talk about morality, but I think people could say it's immoral to benefit wealthy people who can afford a house as opposed to people who can't and rent. But I mean, morality is, we can get to the morality question. But we also do that we subsidize businesses all the time. I imagine you're also against that. I mean, so it's not.
Two wrongs don't make a right, though. We shouldn't do more bad things because we already do some bad things.
Well, I don't necessarily think those things are bad, and I do think sometimes, doing the same for one group of people as we do for another can balance out things. In fact, but we also, I mean, you don't agree with any type of government subsidies on anything except for K through 12. You're okay with that?
I mean, I'm a classical liberal, so I believe in a small role for government, national defense, interstate infrastructure, right? I'm not a total anarchist here. Education to some degree, right? The reason I view college as different.
Let me ask, just while we're there, how do you make that distinction between the education you get through K through 12 and the education you would get through, let's say, K through 16?
Well, the biggest difference is you're an adult versus a minor. The other one is the bare minimum that you need to participate in society. But college degrees, like I said, a lot of people still don't have them, and they earn you $1 million more on average over your lifetime, right? They're an investment in your future earning potential. And I think it's fair to ask people to pay off an investment in themselves rather than they get the huge increase in lifetime earnings, but other taxpayers who didn't go to college have to help pay for that. That's part of why I think it's pretty unfair.
Can I just say that I think the $1 million average thing is a little bit misleading because it's the classic case of if Bill Gates and I walk into a room, the average wealth that we have is in the billions of dollars. And I can assure you that I do not have billions of dollars. So when we look at that, we have a wealth inequality issue here. But we also know that, like, when you talk about the value of a college education, accruing an extra $1 million in terms of, a lot of that also has to do with wealthy people, right? Like, I mean, I think you must observe this as well, that, like, depending on the college you go to and the money you have when you enter into that college, the value of that degree is actually enhanced by how wealthy you are when you enter into that college, because you get money, you get jobs by networking. I mean, this isn't a blanket statement, but in the main, the fact of the matter is wealthy people, if you control for college, make more money. If you're wealthy at age 18, you're going to be that much more wealthy at age 55, regardless if you control for college education or any other factors, simply because you swim in a sea of wealthy people. So my point is just that figure can be misleading in terms of.
But there's another aspect to it, though, Sam, which I think you're right. Obviously, it takes money to make money. There's some social capital. Like, all of that's true. But on the other hand,
I'm not saying it takes money to make money. I'm saying that when you're from money, you end up making more money.
Social networks.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm sure that's true. It also matters a ton what you choose to study, though. And if you look at the different majors, they have huge differences in their starting salaries. And this is information that young people know going into their college when they're sophomores, they're choosing a major. They have this available to them. It is, I think, legally required, but I'm not 100% sure. But almost every college has this. Our graduates in this department earn this on average. And if you choose to study something like philosophy or poetry or anything, they might be very great things to study, right? But you know that the starting salary for that's going to be $40,000, $50,000, and you know we need STEM majors. So when you socialize the cost of education and you push it onto taxpayers with cancellation or with free college or whatever, you're removing that market incentive. If people actually had to pay for their own college and pay for their own student debt, it would drive more people to the in-demand areas like STEM because they pay more. And that's actually what we need. We need an educated workforce, but not all degrees are created equally. We don't need more people in many different majors where there's in healthcare. In STEM, there's a huge shortage, but as soon as you take the costs and benefits away and push them onto taxpayers, you no longer have those market forces pushing us towards productivity. And instead, people can study whatever they want. They can study for how many years they want. Another angle on this, Sam.
Hold on, let me just take you there, and then we'll get to that. Because in the world that you're talking about, only wealthy people would study art. Only wealthy people would study philosophy. Only wealthy people would study English. Only wealthy people would study civics. Only wealthy people would study archaeology or study anthropology, or only wealthy people our humanities would only be dominated by people who enter into college wealthy because they would be unencumbered by the concerns that you're talking about in terms of, like, I need a return on investment here. I mean, you're talking about, just to be clear, I mean, and different people can have different opinions about this, but the society you're talking about is where we do not provide higher education to people who are anything but wealthy, in terms of just being educated, right? Like you need to go in and really for you, higher education should be strictly vocational.
It's an investment.
Strictly vocational for the non-wealthy in this
If your college degree isn't going to earn you enough to be able to pay for it, yeah, I think it's probably not a good idea. If it's not a good individual investment, I don't see why it would be a good societal investment. It's not that only wealthy people.
I just want to be clear. You don't think that there is value to society to have a wide range of socioeconomic people be teachers or be archaeologists or be social workers, or
but they can still be those things. They're just. Let me give you an example.
They're just going to live in horrible debt.
I had a gym teacher in high school who went to Brown, and let me tell you, my public high school, I'm sure, pays their gym teachers far less than they deserve to have to put up with kids like me, right? She shouldn't have gone to Brown to get a degree in physical education. I'm sure she's buried in debt. I even have talked to her about it. She should have gone to Salem State in Massachusetts, where she could have gotten out with minimal debt. Or she should have gone to a community college and then a state school for 2 years to get that bachelor's degree.
Did she know she wanted to be a gym teacher when she entered Brown?
She chose to major in physical education, so I don't know what else you'd go.
Physical therapy. Maybe she wanted to help kids. And I'm aware of Salem State. I'm from Worcester, and so
Oh, okay. I'm from Bellingham originally.
All right. Well, yeah, that's what I figured. Bellingham. I'm joking. But okay, so and I would imagine when she went to Brown, the cost of Brown was also significantly cheaper than it is.
Well, she's pretty young. She's not that much. She wasn't that much older, so I'm sure it was still pretty crazy expensive.
And so we should, in your perfect world, elite universities where you get exposed to different people and different ideas, and where you would have a commingling of socioeconomic strata. That's bad because the market doesn't favor that. We should not.
No, it's not that it's bad, Sam. So it's that we'd have to have one of two things. One, these universities like Harvard they give huge amounts of financial aid, first of all, and that's great. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. Secondly, you could still go. All you'd have to do is go to a private bank, convince them to give you the loan, which they'll do looking at an ROI. Will you be able to pay this back? And we're not bailing out the banks in my scenario, so there's none of that happening.
We did do that, though. We do. I mean, now we own. I mean, as a government, we own a lot of debt that originated as private.
But I'm against. But I'm against that. And so what you'd have to do is you'd have to go to your private, because I think the federal student loan programs have been shown to really have jacked up the cost of college. Every dollar they give out in loans.
We'll get to that in a minute. But
okay. But I'm saying in a private system, it's not that low-income people or people from modest beginnings wouldn't have access. It's that they would have to say, okay, I'm going to go study engineering. A bank will give you a loan if there's a good chance you'll be able to pay it back. That would be a thing. Right now they're crowded out because the government does all the loans, and then taxpayers are ultimately probably going to be on the hook for a lot of it.
Okay, I think to the extent that taxpayers are on the hook for all the tax cuts, we have.
Tax cuts aren't the same. That's people keeping their money, Sam. It's not the same as a transfer.
It's not their money. It's not your money.
It's your money. The money you earn and get a tax cut on it's your money. You earned it.
Dude, that money's the U.S. government's money.
Not if they let you keep.
Pick up a piece of paper on your desk.
Okay.
Tear it. You are safe from the government coming after you. Now do that with a $5 bill. You're not allowed to do that. It's the government's money. We have it. They print it, and we have ownership for a period of time, but the fact is it's the government's money.
So you think everyone's incomes are actually just the government's money that they're going to let us decide how much to have? I think we have very different views of property rights, which I knew. I knew that coming into
100%. And we also have a different view of what is valuable to society. In my mind, it is valuable to society to have an educated population, even if that is not measured in the amount of money that they earn.
But those market signals are telling us what's in demand, what our society needs. We need more doctors. Right. We need more engineers. We don't need more English majors right now. And when we do, the salaries will go up.
But aren't you guys for human freedom and expression? Isn't that the big thing that folks who are libertarian?
But pay for it yourself. You want to study English? Be my guest. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to.
Wait a second. So you don't accept that money is a constraint on human freedom, while at the same time, you can't achieve, like, for instance, you're basically saying to me that if I want to be a social worker, or I want to be an archaeologist, if I don't have the money to do that, you think that society should not participate in any way in helping me achieve that goal?
No, you'll be able to get a loan if you're going to be able to earn enough.
Well,
to pay
now
it
I'm
off,
going to be
and you'll able
saddled
go.
with,
or you can go to community college.
Enormous debt. I'll be saddled with.
Community college is practically free, right? Compared to, it costs extremely small amounts of money, and anyone can go to a community college for 2 years, get an associate's degree with almost no debt, then go to a public school, finish their bachelor's degree, sure, in archaeology, and then go to your public school. You'll have a little bit of debt if you do 2 years at a state public college, and you'll have a degree and go work. That's fine. I'm just not willing to pay for it. Sam, let me just get personal for a second. I went to the University of Massachusetts, you're a Massachusetts guy, right? Had a scholarship. I could have gone to Boston College, right? I could have gone somewhere bougie. I worked from a week before my first year started as a security guard working nights, all to avoid debt, all right? I got out with very minimal debt. Turns out I'm a sucker, right? I should have taken it a lot easier, ran up 10K, and Uncle Joe would be making other people pay it off. And now I'm going to have to pay more in taxes.
But wait a second.
So that other people
you had debt?
did it.
You had debt, or you have paid off your debt?
I very minimal debt, small amount, so far less than
so you did
$10.
get some debt relief.
What?
You did get
it's paid off.
Oh, so you don't have any more debt?
I don't have debt. No, I don't have any student debt.
Okay. And so you resent that the other people are getting that debt. Do you own a home?
Because I have to pay for it.
No, I understand. Do you own a home?
I do.
Oh, okay. And what if someone says, I resent the fact that you pay your mortgage, like you decided to take this loan, and why do you get a tax deduction for it? Why does the U.S. government?
If you ask me, vote yes or no, get rid of the tax deduction, I would say yes, get rid of it. So it's not a comparable example. You can't pin me down for that. I don't support that, right? But also, again, that would be me keeping my own income more from this deduction, not getting somebody else's money to pay for my education. It's still apples. We're not going to see eye to eye on that, but it's still apples and oranges.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the government expends money on your public school education. The expenditure on this debt is the same thing. It's just happening afterwards.
It's taking from taxpayers and giving it to other people.
Right.
Whereas me getting a tax deduction is me keeping my own money. It's not me getting somebody else's money.
Well, but in terms of the government's ledger, it's the exact same thing. It's income that would have otherwise been
public. Yeah, sure. But it's morally different, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you have your set of morals, but again, your moral world is one in which only wealthy people deserve to go to the highest institutions of learning and have a free range as to what they can do.
No.
Poorer people are constrained by a return on investment.
Study something productive will be able to go and pay it back, and we won't have society subsidizing people.
We just said the same thing.
Gender studies and then work at Starbucks.
Yes, we just said the same thing. It's just that you said it in a way that makes it sound less real than it is. The reality of what you're saying, that you need to have a return on investment, is that only people who are wealthy can afford to go into professions which have a income to debt ratio that would sink less wealthy people.
A poor person who's going to study engineering and gets a loan will still be able to pay it back.
I'm talking about professions that don't have an income to debt ratio. So for instance, if I go, like you say, you're a gym teacher who you think is an idiot because she didn't go to Salem State as opposed to Brown, you think that only wealthy people...
I don't think she's an idiot. I think that was a bad choice.
Okay. Wealthy people can go to Brown and be a gym teacher or some other job that's not going to pay them. But people who are not wealthy, they got to go to Salem State.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So we see.
My values start with pay your own way in life as much as possible. And you're saying that I have a human right to make other people pay for me to study basket weaving at Brown and pay $70,000 a year.
are you in favor of of the estate tax? Because your principle from the get-go is people should pay their way through society. So how about this? Can we agree on this? Students of wealthy families, their families cannot contribute to their education. They should pay
Sure
their
they should.
own way.
Why wouldn't they be able to do that?
Well, I was just going by your principle, which you have to pay your way. But if you have generational wealth, then that's okay too. So you can inherit money.
Sure. Yeah. Why wouldn't you be able to?
Well,
if your family counts as paying your own way, sure.
Oh, I see.
I mean, not everyone's equally lucky. Yeah, I agree. Some people are born rich, some people are born poor. But yes, that's just reality.
It is reality, but how we decide as a society to address that disparity is actually just a choice. Your moral choice is luck will dictate people's trajectory through life and society. My moral choice is that as a society, what we should be doing is attempting to allow everyone as much freedom in terms of how they actualize themselves. That's the more moral choice. That money
at somebody else's expense.
Yes. And because everything is at somebody else's expense. None of those people who inherited money from their families didn't do so at somebody else's expense. None of them. You think
How?
that wealth can be created, intergenerational wealth that can be created doesn't come at the expense of other people?
It depends how it was originally created, but a lot of economic interactions are not zero sum.
Well, give me an example of somebody who has of a family that is worth $5 million that didn't do it at the expense of other people.
Sure, a businessman came up with a product, sold it to a bunch of people who were happy to pay the price because it was more
let's get a
valuable
little
to
bit
them.
more specific. Let's get a little more specific. This businessman, what kind of product is it? Is it a factory? I mean,
The guy who discovered buffalo wings. That's my favorite food. How about that? And then he was the first person to open up a shop selling buffalo wings. He sold them for a price. Everybody loved them, was happy to pay for them. He built a whole empire of buffalo sauce. Now it's in every store. He's made millions of people happy. They got a product
So
they were
his
willing to
trucks
pay for, and
go
he's made
off.
a bunch of money.
His trucks, which have wear and tear on roads in a way that, let's say, a car doesn't, subsidized by society, my tax dollars, drop those chicken wings at the chicken wing store. I mean, he's doing that with my cost. That's just one cost that's associated with it. The FDA or the USDA, which makes sure that I can trust that those chicken wings are not going to give me salmonella till we get cuts on that. That also enhances his business, right? I mean, all of this comes at the expense of other people. Never mind the idea of the workers who have produced, have used their labor for the production of this, but just based upon what society has given that person and how much value they got out of what society did. Like,
But they also pay taxes right back into the same roads. Lots of them if they're making a multi-million-dollar business. So I don't understand.
But they don't pay taxes at the beginning. I mean, look, if you give me $100,000
payroll taxes as they go every day, all the time.
Well, those payroll
Massive
taxes
amounts.
go to the workers' Social Security taxes, and Medicare. But that investment that existed before that guy started selling chicken wings, the roads, the infrastructure, all of what society has built before that guy was probably even born to develop, to invent chicken wings, all existed, and he could not have made a single dollar without those things. So there's nobody in our society.
I'm not arguing against roads, Sam.
Well, then you're not arguing. Then you're also okay with government investment in things that has created wealth for people. And this person also, undoubtedly, statistically speaking, if we're going to talk about averages, also benefited from the fact that, like, our society, both institutionally and in terms of government, allowed him to accrue wealth, intergenerational wealth, that certain groups of people weren't allowed to grow. I mean, just in terms of like housing and whatnot.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. No, I understand. And I understand that intergenerational wealth for a long time in the Black community and other communities was blocked. But to me, the answer isn't to block anyone's creation of intergenerational wealth. It's to open up opportunity to more people. And I guess this idea that because I think roads should exist, I therefore have to support any kind of expenditure into somebody else that's a indirect
but we were just
investment.
talking about the principle of morality. I mean, I don't usually talk in terms of morality when we talk about policy but if you're going to talk about the morality of some people contributing to the success of other people, my tax dollars going towards like somebody who's at public school, if my kids are at private school or something, if you're saying that's immoral, then roads, you are implicating roads. You're implicating all of society's infrastructure.
I'm saying that it is immoral to an investment that's going to make somebody a lot of more money over their lifetime. Other people get to pay for it.
So the fact that he capped it at $125,000.
Well, so it's really capped at $250,000 though, because if you're married, say I'm a lawyer who earns $230,000 and my husband is a stay-at-home husband or my wife is a stay-at-home wife, I'm getting debt relief. It's capped. And a full student debt cancellation without caps would be a lot worse. Full student debt cancellation gives 6 times more benefit to the top 20% than the bottom 20%. Biden's isn't nearly as bad because of the income caps. I'll give you that.
We have 35% of people who never graduated, who never got that degree, who have student debt.
They still do earn more though than high school grads. Some college has a higher earnings than college
how much? Well, actually,
I don't know off the top of my head.
12%. Okay. Would you be okay with getting rid of all of their debt? Is that the issue, that you don't want to give it to people who you presume are making more money regardless of their income debt ratio?
I think it would make more sense, and I'm not even saying I support this, but it would make more sense to say we're simply going to give everybody that earns less than $75,000 $10,000 to do what they want with, or whatever the income threshold is, than to only condition it around college, as if, the janitor doesn't have credit card debt or medical debt that he would need money for. That's the whole problem I have. Is if you just want to give out money, let's why college grads? And the reason why, if we're being honest, Sam, is because college graduates and student debt holders and young people, these are Democrat voters, and they're trying to rile them up before. It's a political thing. It's clientelism. We all know this. We don't have. We can pretend.
You don't think that there? You don't think that there are any Republican college grads?
Oh, sure there are, but it's the majority. It's a younger demographic. It's a more educated demographic. These are people that vote much more for Democrats. That's just a fact. Look at Pew, look at Gallup. You know this.
I think that there is. I think that you could argue that the reason why there was the political strength to do this was because of the Democratic electorate. Yeah, I would imagine that.
And the timing, come on, we're a couple months before the midterms. Biden's struggling.
To be fair,
I'm going to give out some money, give free money to my voters.
Let's also be clear. Let's make a distinction. When we talk about $10,000 in student debt, we're not actually talking about $10,000 that is expended by the government. This involves also interest, right? So the idea of the U.S. government making money on the education of its citizens, to me, that's immoral.
But a lot of it's given at below market, at subsidized rates. There are unsubsidized ones as well, but a lot of them are at subsidized rates. The loans. There's 2 types of Stratford loans, subsidized and unsubsidized. The unsubsidized, what you're saying would apply to, but the subsidized ones are given specifically at below market rates, much more affordable than you get from a private bank.
Well, that may be more affordable, but it's still interest. Interest is still interest. 6% interest is less than 12% interest, but it's still interest.
Sure.
Right. So, my point being that when we say $10,000 in terms of, you said hand out $10,000 to student loan debt holders, it's not actually giving them $10,000 from the perspective of the government. It's actually just giving them, in many cases, maybe $5,000 and then $5,000 of interest that is accrued that was never expended or collected from taxpayers.
Well,
Just to be clear.
a lot of the interest has actually been forgiven over the last 2 years slowly, but it would really vary wildly case to case.
There was a moratorium on it, but yes.
Yes, and as the moratorium went, the interest payments that were being accrued were waived completely. And the biggest beneficiaries of that were doctors and lawyers, actually, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, I mean, the interest thing will vary a lot.
Didn't you say we need more doctors?
Yes, and they should pay for it. I don't think they need subsidies.
But wait a second. Didn't you just say earlier that we need more doctors and society should make it easy and encourage that? So why isn't the market working?
It is. That's why doctors earn 200, 300 grand. Heart surgeons earn $500,000 because we need more of them.
Okay, but we need more of them, but they're making so much money and their debt is not in any way inhibiting them. So why don't we have more of them? I mean, isn't that the way it works, according to you?
Well, you know, our healthcare system is far from a free market, right? It's not the kind of model I'd advocate for. There's many layers of bureaucracy and regulation and government in there, but we do have huge demand to go into medical school. I mean, there's a reason these places.
So wait a second. So for this system that you're talking about to work with doctors, we also have to what? Get rid of like Medicare? Well, you just said, why? I asked you, why isn't, you said, let me just see if I got this straight. You said to me that we shouldn't be paying doctors because we shouldn't be providing any debt relief to any doctor.
They can pay it back when they're earning 300 grand.
I understand. And you're saying, but we still have a deficit of doctors in this country, despite the fact that according to your calculation, they should be making hand over fist. And in your world, that's how people enter the market works. If you're going to make a lot of money, it'll attract more people, but it's not working. And you're saying the reason that's not working is because of government regulation and socialized medicine in this country.
Well, part of it is actually limiting the number of med school seats, which I think is done at the behest of the AMA. But we're getting into terrain here where I'm not 100%.
But that's not government. I mean, but you said
it's regulatory.
You said government. You said government regulation and socialized medicine, and the biggest socialized medicine we have is Medicare. To the extent that it's socialized medicine, it's really socialized insurance. But be that as it may. But so, are you suggesting for the market to work with doctors, we need to get rid of Medicare?
Well, look, healthcare policy is a whole nother thing. I don't necessarily know the answer to that question. But what I will say is this. For you to say the market should be working, one, it is. We're getting a lot more doctors, a lot more people want to go. But right now, we already are. It's not a market in terms of what degrees of people are getting. It's vastly subsidized. People are betting on their loans getting canceled, especially after this. So they'll go into the poetry degree instead of biology.
Wait. You're telling me that people have been betting on getting their loans canceled up to this point?
Oh, absolutely. I was just in college a few years ago, but with Bernie almost winning the nomination twice, the Democrat Party moving from completely opposing cancellation to now being many of them all in on it, even the moderates partially in on it, absolutely. Young people are taking out debt today that they don't expect to ever have to pay back.
That's fascinating. Do you have any data to back that up other than the anecdotes at UMass?
I not off the top of my head, but I mean, there's a reason it's continued to skyrocket. I mean, I personally advised friends, and even though I'm against the cancellation, right, I knew it was going to happen, at least to some extent. So I'm like, yeah, take some loans, because the worst that can happen
more is going to get canceled?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
How
They're
much?
just opening, because think about it. It's just a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Within, I think it's 8 years. I don't know off the top of my head. We'll be right back at 1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Of course, they're going to say, you can't just say they're not fixing the system. They're not making college affordable in any way. They're just canceling the tip of the iceberg.
Okay,
they're going to be back demanding more taxpayer money go to this in like 2 minutes.
I mean, I hope you're right. And we should also say that in terms of STEM, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are more STEM graduates than there are STEM jobs. So I'm not sure what the specific special sauce is for you to go to school. Now, you remember too, right? Like, I mean, if we're talking also graduate school, can you predict, since you've also had the ability to predict that we're going to get more student debt relief, what's going to be the top 5 paying jobs 10 years out from now? I'm a 17, my daughter's looking at colleges, okay? It's going to cost a lot of money. What should she go into right now? Also contemplate graduate school. That is going to be the best top 5 rate of return on the
computer
investment.
science, coding, no doubt. She'll be
Coding.
making bank. Yes.
Coding. Okay.
Oh yeah,
What's-
the guys at UMass, right, with just a public school. My friends who were in coding, they were getting 6-figure job offers
but now you're
from
looking,
the first day.
Yeah, now you're looking backwards, but you
Backwards
believe,
like 3 years.
okay, but you anticipate that 8-10 years out, coding is going to be the biggest profession.
Computer
now,
science.
What if this show's not quite that big, but what if everybody was to go into coding?
Well, we've had something happen with this, like with lawyers, actually, a little bit, where there was kind of a glut in terms of more people going into law school than there were legal jobs because the salaries were really high and because the law schools were admitting tons of students. And it will adjust, right? If all of a sudden we have more, but I agree with you. It's not a perfect science.
But it will adjust. But I mean, you're telling me that a 17 or 18-year-old should be making wiser decisions about what they're going to go into. And if it adjusts, they're going to get screwed. So to those people, do we give debt relief or no? It's just luck of the draw again.
I mean, I think if we want to talk about very targeted, specific things, we could talk about it. It would really depend. But it's not as if computer science jobs aren't going to be here 10 years. Like, we can predict with a good degree of certainty, we're going to need nurses, we're going to need doctors, we're going to need coders.
You don't think that coding is going to, there's an opportunity for coding maybe to get offshored?
We're booming in our coding centers.
What's the average? What's the average? What would you say the average is? I live in Brooklyn. What's the average per year for your coder?
Right out of college, honestly, I don't know, but I would bet my hat it's 6 figures, right? I just know that. So look, I studied social sciences. I studied economics, which is the best ROI on any of the social sciences. However, a lot of my friends were in the coding department, and I'm just telling you, everyone wanted to get into this department and couldn't, and was applying and trying because there were only so many seats at the school. They had no shortage of high-paying job opportunities. The idea that they're going to get, some of them are going to get debt relief, right? They're fresh graduates, they're making 130, they'll qualify. It's obscene. It's absurd. These people are going to be they're going to be millionaires by the time they're 35, some of them. And they are going to get some taxpayer relief right now.
Some are, but the vast majority
and none of them are going to be poor. None of them are going to be the working class.
But the vast majority, I agree that except for that 35% who didn't get the degree, the college degree, and probably more out of those, this does not target exclusively working class people.
That's what bothers me, though, Sam. On your side, the progressives, they frame it like we care about the working class, we care about the poor. Student debt relief mostly targets the middle and upper middle, a relatively affluent, educated. Like, why aren't we?
That's simply not true. I mean, it definitely captures people who are making $125,000, and I'm sure there are some families where the individual is making more than that and supporting both his or her spouse or living partner. I imagine if that second person is not working, they probably have kids.
But Sam, do you support not Biden's plan with the income caps? Do you support canceling all student debt?
I would go up to 50,000.
Okay, well, that, just so you know, look at any analysis, 50,000 per borrower with no income caps would be vastly regressive. It would be the Trump tax cuts and everything you say you hate, but it's the soft spot for progressives where they don't live out their values.
No.
Yes.
But I also would make a free college option in every state. I mean, since we're
free, as in taxpayers pay for it.
Yeah. As in the same way that taxpayers pay for K through 12, I would make it K through 16. And you know what I would do? I would raise taxes so that those wealthy people who got the benefit of the $50,000 debt relief end up paying on the back end even more.
You can't fund all this with just taxing the rich.
Well,
and no,
I can. I definitely can.
Sam,
in fact,
you could confiscate.
Not only would I tax the income, I would come for the wealth.
Right,
I
and
would
it would flee very quickly. Wealth taxes haven't worked out very well in Europe, have they? Most countries have repealed them.
Well, then good luck to those people.
Yes, just chase all the wealth out of our country. Yes, that's a very good idea.
Wait a second. We're not going to take all the wealth out of our country. I'm not worried about those billionaires. I would take since we're getting my wish list, not only would I get those $50,000, and I'll tell you why. Because if you want to talk about government efficiency, I know you guys like the idea of a smaller government and a less bureaucracy. This creates less bureaucracy. Everybody gets $50,000 debt relief, and then I collect that money on the other end because I already have an apparatus set up to do it. The only thing I got to do is change two numbers. I got to change 10,000 to 50,000, and then I got to change the top marginal rate, where I think it's and I would maybe three numbers because I would do capital gains as well. And I would push that up to where it was in the 50s and 60s in this country, which is around every dollar you make over 3 million, we're going to take 90 cents of it. That's what the rate was.
Terrible idea.
In the 40s and 50s.
Sam, let me ask you a question, right? Why do we tax cigarettes? Because when you put a tax on something, you get less of it. And cigarette smoking is bad for your health. You want to put a tax on productive investments, income, and wealth. Those are things we should want more of in our country, not less. And you're talking about 90% taxes on income.
First of all, I dispute the fact that it's productive, that capital gains.
It's the definition of a capital gain.
No. It isn't.
A return on a productive investment.
What's productive about you investing in the stock market?
Well, it's indirect, but what stocks go up and what stocks go down is what businesses perform well. And
explain to me the indirectness of when you buy stocks, you buy 100 shares of Apple and it goes up 5 points and you make this chunk of money. What's productive about that investment?
The fact that Apple is worth more as a company because it's getting bigger, it's growing, is why the stock goes up. If you bought Amazon in 1985 or whatever.
Productive? No. You're telling me that Apple's value is reflected in its stock, but I'm asking you, your $100, which Apple doesn't see, what's the productive value in that? What is Apple producing more for society than it would have otherwise?
Because the reason that the stock is going up is because the company is performing well.
Yeah, so the stock is reflective of how the company is doing, but you,
right, and by investing in it, you're picking the productive companies. We're rewarding that with the capital
You're just
gain.
betting. That's like me saying, like, when I bet on a horse and it wins, I made it run faster.
It's a little different when it's an investment
but
into a company.
But it's not an investment into a company.
What is a company going public?
Selling off their stock.
In return
money.
For what? What do they do with it?
What do they do with that money? They put it into the shareholders. Yeah. They buy more stock, often stock buybacks. They offshore that cash, billions upon billions of dollars.
They also invest it. A lot of it.
Well, if they have that much cash reserves, they don't need that money. And so your investment is not really that productive. But so let me ask you this. What makes you think if the government takes that money and redistributes it, that as a society, we have less wealth? I mean, what's the difference in terms of societal wealth? If let's put it this way, you walk into the room and I walk into the room, or Bill Gates and I walk into the room. If the government takes $1 billion from Bill Gates and gives it to me, the wealth in that room is exactly the same as it was when Bill Gates and I entered.
But future wealth creation is going to go to crap. I mean, if a billionaire can create a super productive company for millions of people and then have all their wealth confiscated, the next one's not going to do it. 90% tax rate over $3 million is what you said.
Why didn't that work in Kansas?
In Kansas,
you know Sam Brown.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Kansas experiment, but that's a whole complicated thing that we would need a whole nother. I'll come back on if you want to dive into that.
The Laffer, it was an Art Laffer. You're stating the Laffer curve to me. You're suggesting
the Laffer curve isn't always true. It's true at a certain point. Obviously, 100% tax would raise
Oh yeah, no, I'm not for
income
100%.
tax.
I'm not for 100%.
You're just for a 90.
90% over the first $3 million, which is what we
So
had
Jeff
in the
Bezos would have
50s.
stopped in what, 1998? And none of us would have the Amazon because he would have earned $3 million. What's he going to do? Keep going for 10%? Of course not. This is incentives 101.
Well, wait a second.
Would you work if you were going to pay 90% taxes for everything you did after a certain point?
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I'd stay home. I'd sunbathe.
Well, no, if I made $3 million, but you know what I would do if I was Jeff Bezos? I would have probably retired after my first billion.
Well,
wouldn't you have?
Probably not, but I'm not really.
Well, you can't spend $1 billion. You can't. So I mean, the Laffer curve.
Accomplish more.
The Laffer
He's created
curve,
millions of jobs, delivers things to our doorsteps more affordably and quicker than anyone could have imagined.
But you're arguing that he
would
would have stopped doing that if he wasn't making as much money, and I'm arguing that I don't think he would have stopped because he still wants to be.
They still want money. It's just like I'm always amazed by. I love soccer,
but
professional soccer players. How they'll make a deal, they'll make a trade for like my salary will go from 50 million to a 75 million. I'm like, what's the practical difference? It seems crazy, but it's how people work. It is how people are motivated.
Well, it's not a practical. It is not a practical difference, and he can still make more money than the next person. It's just
but they're still motivated by it. It's just
what happened in the 50s and the 60s in this country? Why didn't what you're suggesting? Why didn't all of those people? You know what the tax rate was in the 50s, right?
On the income tax?
Yeah.
Wasn't it as high as 70% at one point?
It was 90%.
But almost no one paid it back then, though. The brackets, almost nobody was in the bracket.
That's not true.
Then. 400,000, way less than would be today.
$450,000. Every dollar you would make over that, 90 cents on the dollar, that existed for almost 20 years in this country. And then in 65, I think it was, 64, somewhere between 64 and 65, it went to 75% on every dollar made over $470,000 annually.
That's obscene.
That's immoral. But, well, okay, you can say it's immoral, but it's not ineffective. We still had things produced. It was a very productive time. And in fact, we had a rising middle class, didn't we? It was called the Great Compression because we had wealth inequality was at its lowest ebb. Maybe
there's like a million different things that are different from 2020 to 1960.
Well, of course, but
I do think taking 90 cents out of a dollar. I mean, what's 100 cents? If you have to work for free, I mean, that's at that point like.
Well, I know that there are people who like to accumulate things, and so they can have that 10%.
Oh, they can. Oh, thank you. That's very generous of you to let them keep 10 cents of their own dollar.
Welcome.
You're very kind, Sam.
I think so. I think so. I may be able to move off that to 11%.
Okay.
All right. So, what is your solution for all this?
For the cost of college?
Yeah. I mean, you've made it clear that you do not think that people who don't have existing wealth should have as much opportunity to go to a top college or a college of their choice. They should have a limited a menu of colleges that they go to. If they want to go into a profession that is not going to pay a lot of money. That's a fair assessment of your position, right?
That's not very charitably stated, but sure.
Well, but that's reality. I mean, that is the real. That's the reality.
It's a spin on. Alternatively, I could say that everyone has the right to pursue a college investment of whatever they like. They simply can't force other people to pay for unproductive investments. I could put my spin on it.
Society should not enable people to do anything that isn't going to give them a return. And only wealthy people will be able to afford. The reality is that only wealthy
people want to waste their money. That is their right.
Right. Okay. Well, it's not a waste to them because they don't have the same.
I think it's a waste. They don't have to agree. I agree. That's their right.
But the fact is that if I'm wealthy, if I've gotten millions of dollars from my parents, and I know that's coming, I can live a very, very good life. and I can dabble around. Maybe I can be a teacher. Maybe I can be.
It doesn't make your English degree a positive ROI, or but you can absorb that loss and still be rich. Sure.
Right. Okay. Right. Only those rich kids can see the value, though, of a humanities degree. Wealthy people would just be largely more educated in the humanities. That's the result of what you're talking about, right?
I think most humanities education at colleges in America today has become a joke. So if they want that, okay.
Okay. And you know this because of your economics degree.
Sure. Yeah. I've studied all about grade inflation, the absolute state of the modern academy. The rigor. There are some really depressing studies. Brian Kaplan has a whole book where he shows that the number, I don't have it all in front of me, but the percentage of people who 5 years out from college report no increase in critical thinking, reading and writing skills on a test from before college when they studied liberal arts, it's a shockingly high percentage.
Is there value in that?
Is there value in what?
In people having those critical thinking skills?
Absolutely, but these degrees aren't providing it in large percentages of the time.
So you do see a value in critical thinking skills, but that's not necessarily a return on investment. You're basically saying
for a lot of jobs.
The food sucks here and the portions are too small. Because if you think there's value in critical thinking.
I am a big believer in big portions.
Right. But if you think there is value in critical thinking, that's different than saying there's value in an education because it gives you dollar return. You're sort of arguing what I'm arguing.
Critical thinking is an essential component in many jobs, lawyers, the LSAT, all this stuff. So
I understand.
It is, but those degrees aren't providing
but not
much
necessarily
of it
in selling cars. You can make a ton of money in
Why
selling
should you need a college degree to sell cars? We need more non-college pathways to work in this country.
You just said critical thinking skills are important, and I'm curious as to why they would be important if really your only measure of the value of a college education is its financial return.
Well, because college is essentially a sorting device more than anything. The idea of it as a human capital expansion is more theoretical than actually proven true in the data on it. This is the whole premise of Brian Kaplan's book.
Explain this sorting thing. What do you mean?
Yeah, college is sure.
Do you think it should be a sorting thing, or do you think unfortunately it is a sorting?
I think it just kind of is what it is. Essentially, you have people who have different skills, who have different aptitudes, who have different work ethics and habits, and college is and employers don't know who these people are. And college is a very expensive and inefficient way for them to vaguely sort high potential employees from low potential employees.
So you don't see any value in the reason why I ask if you say that, sadly, it's just a sorting thing, is that do you think that there is a universe where it's good to give people a higher education? Yes or no?
Sure, but Sam, let me just put it like this. How come when you go to college, if I do 7 semesters and then I quit right before graduation and I don't get the degree, employers, I don't get nearly as much benefit? It's because, unfortunately, college is really about the degree. We've got this huge degree inflation. It's not actually about the massive expansions in your critical thinking.
We do the same thing with high school diplomas, right? You get a GED.
High school's also, it's the same thing. You're sorting people who can't complete their GED. Often, it's because they don't do their homework, they don't show up to school. Blah, blah. It's not hard to get a GED.
Do you think that's the purpose of higher education, though? Do you think that's the purpose of higher education? That should be the purpose I don't
know that it should be, but I think in practice it is.
Okay. So what do you think? Do you think that we should have higher education so that people can study stuff that's more sophisticated than in high school?
I think you can self-study more things than not in the age of the internet, right?
So you don't think that we need higher education?
I think it should be an option for people, but it should be largely with a mind to your vocation and your return on investment. I don't think, if you want to study poetry, I don't know why that you should have to spend $200,000 to do that. Go to your library, go to listen to YouTube lectures, go listen to Sam
Where do you
Seder.
think all of those people who did those lectures and, basically populated most of those books in the library, where do you think they learned about poetry?
at universities in the age before. I mean, okay,
when
boomer,
when did universities, when did this age change? When did universities become?
I mean, you're trying to tell me that the internet and things like Wikipedia and YouTube haven't radically restructured our access to information and how we approach education?
No,
Look at
that's
something
not
like
what I'm
Khan
telling
Academy.
you. I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you that that information emanates from human beings. And
Sure, yeah.
those human beings went to university, and that at one point the supply of new people who have gone to university, and I think you've even written how remote learning is certainly not as good as in person, right? Didn't you write something about that?
Well, when it's forced upon kids,
Right. But I mean, if there's no universities, then they're forced to do it if they want to learn it. But
I'm not saying there should be no universities. I'm saying there should be. Harvard is going to study English and produce poetry till the cows come home. They've got billion-dollar endowments. All I'm saying is I don't see why taxpayers have to subsidize poetry.
Well, I was getting at the question as to what you thought the value of higher education is. If you thought it was a lament that. And I don't agree with the premise that it's simply a sorting thing for businesses, but you feel that way.
When I went to UMass, most people went there to get the piece of paper, get drunk. They learned basically nothing. They slept through half their classes. They cheated on tests. Like, I'm just telling you the honest truth. We can pretend college is really about, growing and learning and expanding your circles. And for some people it is, but I learned far more since I left college doing actual work than I did in these dusty classrooms. I really think it's vastly overhyped. And I think we need more alternatives, more apprenticeships, more programs like Google's doing, right, where you can learn to code outside of a 4-year degree program. Every kid shouldn't have to go to college, because this system that we have now is making a college degree the new high school degree. And all of a sudden,
where do you think we fit in terms of like industrialized nations in terms of like college participation?
I don't know off the top of my head. Probably lower than places where it's free, quote unquote.
But I mean, give me a sense. I mean, for some reason, like other societies think that higher education is important. They could all be wrong. I'm just curious as to where you think we're doing with this. Like, because it sounds like you think that everybody goes to college in this country, and
Oh, I don't think that. I think that's part of why I oppose student debt cancellation is that 2 in 3 Americans over age 25 don't have bachelor's degrees.
Why do you think so many other nations around the world don't subscribe to this notion that higher education is just a waste?
Well, because again, it's associated with a big premium. Your college degree earns you more over a lifetime, but is it actually because you're expanding
even
your
in
brain,
places where there's much more tax rates, higher tax rates too?
Sure, they also tend to have much lower graduation rates because they when it's just
I'm talking
free.
graduates. I'm talking about graduations. I'm talking about graduates.
Oh,
because
what about them?
The U.S. ranks number 5 in folks who have graduated from university, number 5 in the country between the ages of 55 and 64. Number 5. But in the ages of 25 to 34, we're not even in the top 10. In other words, the percentage of graduates in this country has gone down significantly over the past 20 years relative to the rest of the OECD.
Sure. It matters what those graduates are in. If France has 10 times as many, poetry majors as us, but we have enough STEM majors and they don't, then we will be better off than them. So that's sure. I mean, okay. I'm not sure what the significance of that is.
I'm just curious as to why these other countries are so deluded in the value of
well, they have different values. They're not governed in the way I'd want to. That I admit my views as a libertarian are a very small minority. I don't pretend they're widely adopted. I simply think that a lot of them should be, and I'm here to say why.
All right. Well, I think you made a good argument about the immorality of relieving debt to people who hold it in college, and the immorality of all government, I guess, of government largesse in any fashion whatsoever. except for that is helping businesses accrue wealth?
Well, I think the basic needs of society, like infrastructure and national defense, need to be funded by taxes. And yeah, that involves people paying for others. But I think when it's a personal investment like education that will earn you huge sums more over your lifetime, it's perfectly fair to expect you to pay back that yourself. And I think we should focus our efforts on actual ways to make colleges more affordable rather than just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole and spending tons of taxpayer money on something that doesn't actually solve the problem.
We're going to run out of time, so I'm just going to ask you one more question. How do we make college more affordable?
Well, the first thing we got to do is scale back the federal subsidies. Subsidies have driven up the price about at 61
By subsidies,
cents.
you're talking about the loans.
Yeah, the subsidized loans in particular, the federal loans.
What do you mean by subsidized loans?
They're at below market interest rates. That's what subsidized. Some of them, yeah. So the loans,
reduced interest rates loans. There's still interest. We're still accruing interest, right? The United States still accruing.
Some of them. Yeah, sure. Okay,
well,
they do have interest on them.
When the moratorium ends, we're still going to be accruing interest on all of this.
Yes, they have interest rates. But the point is that we've massively subsidized demand. And of course, that's going to inflate prices. It's estimated that about for every dollar we spend on student loans, they've jacked up tuition about 50 cents, and that's been captured by the universities. That is a big part of this problem. We can't just massively subsidize demand and expect prices not to go up. We've got to return it to a market-based system. Private banks will only provide loans where they actually are going to be able to pay them off on average. They won't be able to predict it perfectly, but you'd actually have to show, I'm going to study this, my productive income will be this, I'll be able to pay it back. The other side of it, Sam, is that colleges today have massively exploded their bureaucracies. The administrator to student ratios has enormously increased, while professors even in the actual academic side isn't getting the investment. So at public colleges, that should really be reined in. At private schools, I guess do what you want, but I think we need to vastly cut the administrative state. Mitch Daniels at Purdue in Indiana has actually shown us how you can freeze tuition and save families millions of dollars if you enact even a smidgen of fiscal conservatism in how we run these universities.
I would agree that we can put more money towards professors. Frankly, I don't know that Daniels did that in terms of professors as much as he did cutting administration costs, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't think that the incredible disinvestment in state universities in any way had anything to do with the increase in tuitions that are paid by the customers? I mean, because I don't
think that's the root, because you can go back to 1960 or 1970 and college was dirt cheap and there was very little state investment compared to what we have now. It's like that's not as a percentage
wise. The operating costs have gone from 1/3 borne by tuition to 1/2 borne by tuition. I mean, there is. I mean, I will say this. I think there is a lack of evidence for the argument that massive disinvestment, which is real. I mean, it is quite obvious that
they pulled back, sure.
Yes, pulled back significantly since really starting in the 70s and really in the 80s is when we started to see, and then it has exponentially increased over the decades. Whether that has contributed, well, it obviously contributed on a state level because if you're going to a state school, tuition is borne more by, or I should say the cost of operating the college has become borne more by the students who are going. And of course, the lowest, and I'm sure you understand this dynamic, if the lowest price thing gets raised, that creates the opportunity for the other things in that market to raise their prices too. If the cheapest product on the shelf raises its cost by 25%, the more expensive ones are also going to raise theirs by 25% because that dynamic is fairly fixed. And that's what's happened in thing. I think there's an argument that administrative bloat has added to it. I think physical plant, because of competition, has increased. and
I mean,
people are
UMass was
trying
paying its coaches millions of dollars, and we sucked. I mean, UMass essentially.
Oh, I would
it's a
agree.
public
We should
school.
cut sports. We should cut sports.
That was one of my takes that pissed off conservatives, Sam, on campus. Was I basically said we should just abolish the football team.
Well, I don't think you necessarily need to abolish it, but you can make it a lot
move
cheaper.
it to D3 and cut the budget to 20% because they suck anyway. We pour millions of our tuition dollars into it, and then they could. While I was there, they could not win a game. So
and student loans certainly was sort of a neoliberal push to essentially have a market solution. A lot of those loans that the federal government now owns were originated by the private sector, by banks. After the financial crisis, we bought up a lot of those as part of backing up the private sector, which cuts against the argument that banks can make a good assessment in that thing, is particularly when there's fees to be collected.
The problem is the banks are so intertwined with government and bailouts that in a free market,
we can agree on that, and we can agree on that thing. Of course, we had a freer market back before the Great Depression, and there's a reason why we have the FDIC and all sorts of bank regulation, or we did anyways. But that's maybe a different day. But all right, well. Brad, I really appreciate your coming on. It was fun. I think it was illuminating for people.
I appreciate you having me on, and the fact that you actually do debates with people. It's a rare thing these days, and it's valuable.
I know it's hard to find people who will do this, but I appreciate it.
I found it very hard, and that's why I really appreciate you having me, because not very many people will talk about these things.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and we're all appreciative. All right.
Bye.
Folks, I accept the criticism that I'm getting.
You're getting criticism?
Well, I'm like, out of the corner of my eye, I'm seeing some IMs going like, fun half in quotes.
Yeah. Well, it's fun for you.
I like that you thought that we might get to calls.
I know. So I'll just mention this. Bradley, hope not blowing up your spot. Bradley and I, we set an over-under on how long that would take in our little G chat here. And you blew over it, but like we said,
44 and a half.
I said 44 and a half, but I was
hammered the over.
I was being generous with that line. I said at least you go through 210, and you blew past it.
I gotta say that there is really nothing in my life where time just sort of like suspends and just goes away.
No, it's a huge value add for you. We really want it. It's a good thing for like we want to. It's a public good for Sam to debate these guys.
Yeah. And we've got some. Bex from Texas says not fun, but Live Free and Die says I think it's fun. Cucker Tarleson. You missed that Biden took his action because he could do it by executive order. Obviously, a comprehensive legislative approach would be better, but he could do this on his own. Yes, that was not like it didn't come up. But yes, New Wave Libertarian Communist. Sam, I helped you get in touch with Larry Sharp to set up that debate a month ago. I was part of the Twitter conversation to get Brad on the show to debate. Where do I sign up to be the MR Libertarian debate booker? First off, I would tell you I would not announce that publicly because there could be a lot of anger from people. Fierce Deity says 2021 D1 NCAA hockey champs. That must be UMass maybe he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, hey, there's people who have come out of UMass, including New York Giants, eventual, hopefully, Ring of Honor member, or maybe not actually, but Victor Cruz, undrafted free agent out of UMass.
Saddled with student debt. So this guy wants to make the loans more expensive, completely ignoring that 18-year-olds have no fucking idea when they get into they're taking out these loans, regardless of how many documents you make them sign, stating they know what they're doing. Of course, it's absurd.
I like that we have a doctor shortage. So that whole like thing where that proves the market is correct because they're getting paid so much. Well, no, we need more doctors and nurses and stuff.
Right.
Actually.
And that is actually the profession where, in terms of just like tuition costs, the barrier to entry is like only for rich people, if you can pay your tuition.
Right. Like anybody, like I'm sorry, but like I think if you came from like particularly low income and worked your way up to be a doctor, I don't care if you're making over $125,000 this year.
Well, the point is that we have a mechanism to means test all of these things. And that means test is called taxes. And the most efficient way to make sure that any policy the government engages in is not regressive, which I would say is probably the only time that folks of Brad's ilk are actually concerned with regressive policies. There is a way to make sure that every policy the government involves in is not regressive. And that is to do it through our tax code. It is the most efficient way. If I give $50,000 or full debt relief, and the only reason why I wouldn't give full debt relief is just because, as a political matter, $50,000 sounds better. Because, and I'll tell you why, because I don't care, and also we should mention, wealthy people do not take out student loans.
Yeah.
That would be, to use Brad's talking points, irrational.
The bad business.
Bad business. Why would you do that? You have the money. Why pay an interest on this? But nevertheless, unless you think that like, oh, I can pay a lower interest on this and I can make more money in my investments in my gold mine or whatever it is that you own, which is also a business deal. But for the most part, but even if they did, even if we were only subsidizing Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner and Eric and Donald Trump Jr., we have a very easy way to make sure that policy is not regressive. And the way that we do that is we raise their taxes. We raise taxes on capital gains. We raise taxes on income. We raise taxes on property if you want. We could do a luxury tax. We can do a trading tax. We can do this. These taxes, in many instances, already exist. The apparatus to collect these taxes already exist. The idea that any policy is regressive by the U.S. government, anybody who complains about that, the next thing out of their mouths should be, we need to raise taxes so that it becomes progressive again. Skippy says, Sam, I don't think I've ever disliked a guest as much as this guy. My head hurts. Survived my second debate. No more. It's like literally like the way to like, if I wanted to end this show, I would
just
do
debates
this
every
5
day.
days a week. And like, it would take, I think, like 3 weeks until it's like, we have no more viewers. No more audience. Nothing.
Even like the haters that want to be on this show to debate you all the time would get sick of you.
Yeah.
Stop the show. Nobody's watching.
He wants to debate too
Why am I
much.
going to come on? All right, let's do some quick clips, okay? We'll do 2 clips.
I think 4 is an easy, quick one.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I got carried away. I'm like sweating. It's like I feel like I need a cigarette after that. It was fantastic. I know.
Your cravings are back.
I accept there's something wrong with me. All right?
Yeah.
I'm at least owning it. That's 50% of the
The
Chris
work.
Burdick says, sometimes I forget this is the fun for Sam half.
Yeah.
We're going to do this Michigan Attorney General.
Was that what I was
Is that
thinking
number
of?
4?
I think Rhonda McDaniel.
Rhonda
Rhonda
McDaniel on
Okay.
candy.
Yeah. Understand that the Republican Party does not want to talk about abortion. It does not want to talk about anything except for essentially immigration. They'll talk inflation, although it is largely, not totally, starting to flatline. The big problem is, of course, rents. And that is driving up the cost. That is driving up, and that is, in many respects, tied to the Fed's decision to raise interest rates, which slows down home buying, which slows down new home building, which then creates pressure on rentals. They really want to talk about immigration, but they also know we don't want to be sitting here slamming immigrants. So we need to sort of like do this sideways. What are the other things? We don't have there's no caravan yet. They're probably down somewhere in, I don't know, in Honduras or Guatemala trying to get a caravan going.
They're still in ones and twosies formation.
Yeah, ones and twosies formation. So what are they going to talk about? Well, of course, they're going to talk about all the drugs that are coming in supposedly from the immigrants.
Bill Clinton weighed in. He thinks that Republicans have a way of trying to win. Listen to him here.
You have to note the Republicans always close well. Why? Because they find some new way to scare the living daylights out of swing voters about something. That's what they did in 2021, where they made critical race theory sound worse than smallpox.
I mean, Greg Gutfeld last night on the 5. Well, he said the Democrats have been trying to scare people as well.
I know. I was going to say, like, newsflash, Bill, your party's doing that just fine. We don't need to help you with that at all. You're scaring voters everywhere with the open border. I mean, just last month, 2,000 pounds of fentanyl came across our border. That could kill 500 million people. We're coming into Halloween. Every mom in the country right now is worried,
Nuclear
what if this gets into
fentanyl.
my kid's Halloween basket?
You're talking about the rainbow
fentanyl. What if my teenager gets this? And
Sorry, I talked over that. That was my bad. Can we just go back to the final 15 seconds? But like, if everyone took
500 million
fentanyl, right?
people.
I know.
This is like
right?
a thing where they're like, this frog has enough poison to kill 6 million people.
Like, yeah, if we all ate this frog, yes, we'd all die.
I will say this. I am against the fentanyl distribution programs that we're setting up for teenagers. That is wrong.
I agree.
Also, like the 500 million dead, because you can't say 1 million because that's how many people died of COVID and they don't treat that seriously.
Wait, also, like, what the Democrats are scaring people with open borders. First off, we don't have open borders. Second off, you're literally scaring people with this fake notion of open borders.
Yeah, but they're just pointing it out. We're the ones doing it, opening up the doors and the borders. All right, sorry about that, Bradley.
Yeah, just fine. We don't need to help you with that at all. You're scaring voters everywhere with the open border. I mean, just last month, 2,000 pounds of fentanyl came across our border. That could kill 500 million people. We're coming into Halloween. Every mom in the country right now is worried, what if this gets into my kid's Halloween basket?
You're talking about the rainbow
fentanyl. What if my teenager gets this? And
Every mom in the country is worrying about that.
Perino's like, of course, the rainbow fentanyl.
I mean,
what's amazing is like she's literally addressing the criticism that you're trying to scare people, and you're telling people that candy giver outers are going to say like, well, I could go buy Snickers and spend $5 on a bag of Snickers, or I got this fentanyl I scored. I'm going to put that in my grab bag.
Give it for free away, because that's what people who are in the fentanyl business are in it for. They're in it for the charitable giving out of the fentanyl, not the like usage or sale of said fentanyl.
Like the only thing she could have done to like verify what Clinton said more is to say then actually CRT is worse than smallpox.
Exactly. It's actually worse than smallpox because smallpox actually has vaccinations. We cannot vaccinate against CRT.
I'm old enough to remember when I was told to look out for needles in my candy
Razor
bars.
blades in the apples is what I used to get.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced now that wasn't basically a story planted by the candy companies to get people to not give fruit in apples at that time of year.
I mean, so okay. I've never got it. That's how your apple obsession started, it seems. But I've never gotten an apple trick or treating. I got candy, and I literally was told by and my family's like kind of liberal, but my mom would even be like, just watch out for if the candy's already open. This was just a real thing that people were scaremongered about, and they're just updating it for fentanyl because it's rainbow colored now for kids. So silly.
Yeah, that is. But you got to appreciate the fact that she was able to pivot from like, oh, you think I'm crazy? I'll show you crazy.
Yeah.
Was that sort of dynamic.
All your kids are going to die.
Oh, I'm up here scaring people? It's funny you say
razor
that.
blades in the
Seeing as how you're basically allowing people to have fentanyl in their candy in October.
Like the classics, like There's going to be razor blades in your caramel apple suckers type of fear mongering.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Should we do number 5? Is that what the other one? Yeah. This is the talking point. You're going to hear a lot about fentanyl. This is the 2022 version of the caravan, is the fentanyl. And of course, we know that when a family comes across the border because they want to make money and they want to get a job so they can send money back, they're going to, of course, smuggle in fentanyl as opposed to like drug dealers who are smuggling in fentanyl. I mean, it's absurd, but this is akin to the caravan coming to take your summer home on the lake in Michigan or Minnesota or wherever it was. Here, not coincidentally, is Michigan Attorney General nominee Matt DePerno. And in Michigan, abortion has become a big, big issue. Whitmer has done a very good job in articulating this, and it appears that it's going to be on the ballot, right? The Supreme Court decided that?
The referendum, yeah.
And the referendum is going to be on the ballot during the election. So they're going to hype up the fentanyl.
I saw you on War Room last night.
Yeah,
that was
good
great,
to see you.
man.
Yeah, Matt DePerno.
Yeah, it's really great. You're sporting Tudor all the way, right?
Yeah.
That's really great to hear. Yeah. Now I gotta ask, there's no abortion law in Michigan, right? It's legal.
Yeah, there's a law.
But we can ban it, right?
Well, there's a law right now that does ban it.
But if Tudor wins, there's no exceptions, right?
Well, the law right now has an exception for life of the mother.
Okay.
But that's the current law. There's currently an injunction that stops the enforcement of it. But we do have a law. We've got one of the strictest laws in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, so what about my aunt and uncle live up there? That's why I don't really know much about it. It's not from North Carolina.
Yeah.
But what about like Plan B and all those sorts of things? Like,
what's Plan B?
The morning after pill.
Oh,
I know my aunt's really worked up about that. I'm like,
I've been following this.
Can you ban it? I mean, is that like?
Well, it's an issue. I mean, in terms of how do you enforce it? How do you enforce?
I mean, can you take it out of stores? Like, I don't know the right answer.
You got to figure out how you ban the pill from the state.
Sure. Can you do that through like going up the courts?
Well, how do you stop it from coming in? That's the question.
I don't know. Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I do, but you have to stop it at the border.
Okay.
It'd be no different than like fentanyl.
So you think it'd be a federal issue, not a state issue?
It's a state issue. It'd be a state issue.
Okay.
The state has to ban it. And it should be banned. Yeah. But it's just an issue of how do you enforce it? How do you make sure that it stops?
First off, can we just say this dude has no idea what the Plan B is?
To go from what is it to I do have a solution. Actually, we need to treat it like fentanyl.
When I took Plan B, I just kept like itching and wanting. It just took one hit, and I wanted some more, and it was really, really addictive. I was like, how can I get my hands on this? Going to CVS and getting it again. And then I graduated to the birth control pill, right? It's just a little bit more socially acceptable.
Fiending.
But what did he mean? You got to stop it at the border. Do they in Michigan, like when you go, because I've been to Michigan many times. I've driven to Michigan many times. I've flown to Michigan many times. Nobody has stopped me to check my papers or to check my bags or any of that stuff.
You got any firearms? Plan B, birth control pills.
Right. I mean, soon it's going to be like condoms, like any form of birth control. He has no idea what it is.
Yeah.
None.
He thinks it's
Zero.
the abortion pill.
None.
Coming over the border.
No idea.
Even less than that?
And I
Even
couldn't
less
tell if
health
he
than
thought,
that?
like initially it was going to come in from Mexico, if he thought the Plan B was coming in there. We got to get that guy out there more.
I agree with that.
City letterer carrier says you can't stop Plan B via USPS mail, baby. I mean, I don't even know, like if you stop Plan B, you are stopping essentially birth control.
Yep.
It's not an abortion pill.
No, it's not. And they're going to, again, we've heard this before. They're the birth control methods they're going to target are the ones where the women have the most control over it. If a man decides to wear a condom, that's fine. But if a woman has an IUD that's inserted by a doctor or uses Plan B and is able to go to a store and make that decision on her own to stop a potential pregnancy, that's what they're going to target first.
Can we do the Crowder thing?
Yes.
Is it worth doing that? Or wait, do you want
It's
to
a
do
little bit long. Well, we can do it. I mean,
let's do it, and then we'll get out of here. I'm sorry to everybody.
It's fine.
I apologize. I went on a bender today. Here's Steven Crowder. Here's Steven Crowder. Doesn't like to debate people unless they don't know that they're about to have a debate with somebody, and he approaches them on the street. This guy doesn't want to show his face on Crowder's show. Can't imagine why. But this is a segment he did on the 4th of July in Dallas.
Gay man reveals the dark side of LGBT community.
That's right. This is an expose. Steven Crowder is talking to a gay man who is telling him the stuff that you never hear, the inside scoop on what's really going on in the LGBT community.
White is. Look, blacks, Asians, Mexicans are like, yeah, man, it's the greatest country. And then like white women are like, F off.
I am the product of an immigrant family.
Where from? Oh, man, you're tall for.
I am, I know.
Now pause it 1 second. Have we decided whether or not we think this is even real?
I think it's real only because, as you'll see, the guy's really a pathetic individual, honestly.
But why did they not say the country? I know, right? Like, okay, let's say are people at home going like, that purple hue and that deep, deep voice, and he says he's from
Mexico,
or I don't know, Latvia,
right.
Or he's from Nicaragua or China or Japan or New Zealand or what? Like, why did they have to redact the country?
I don't know. I mean,
that seems weird, but
because the left is so crazy that they would have doxed this guy if they hadn't.
Right.
Track him down.
I got to think that he's probably like from a European country.
Also, doesn't Crowder's team have a better graphics department? Because there's just like this huge purple.
It's like the ghost
blob.
of Grimace from McDonald's.
I mean, but like we just saw him essentially deepfake himself into that what do you call it? Tom Hanks movie.
The Saving Private Ryan.
Saving Private Ryan, right? Like, I mean, come on, man.
I am going to, but let's hear it.
We're like, F off.
I am the product of an immigrant family.
Where from? Oh, man, you're tall for.
I am, I know.
What are you, 6'2"? 6'2"?
Yeah, 6'1".
Well, I guess it's the hair, right? 6'2".
All right, count of 3, 1, 2.
Pause it for 1 second. So you're tall from there. So I'm trying to think like Crowder. Like, where do I anticipate?
Where does he think is the shortest
from?
stereotype?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Dude, thank you so much.
No, thank you, and I appreciate, man. I know the balls it takes to stand up, and you're like, I feel genuinely bad.
I don't anymore.
Yeah.
No, I bartend. That's a liberal, I'm liberals all over the place.
Right.
And after the Roe v. Wade, everyone was buzzing about it, and I'm just like, shut up.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong in a bar with alcohol and
I know.
whatever. I'm not gloating. I don't care.
Wait, pause it for 1 second. Nobody wants to talk about the news
when they
or
drink.
the loss of like individual rights in a bar, man. That's not what a bar is for.
Bars for getting ass.
I've had so many loud arguments about politics and bars that I can't that's exactly what you argue about.
I just what I can understand people, that guy going like, I'm not a liberal, and just to hear these babies cry about it, but to say that doesn't belong in a bar.
Yeah.
Also, aren't they all the free speech people right now? They're policing in which public spaces certain topics can be discussed.
Also, I think he's in Dallas here, which is kind of against the narrative of oh yeah, everyone wants these abortion restrictions. If even Dallas, the bars are overflowing with people that are pissed off at Roe v. Wade, that tells you something.
Yeah. What? Only liberals go to bars? All right.
in a bar with alcohol and
I know.
whatever, I'm not gloating. I don't care. But also,
I think it's the end of the world. It's like, did you realize this is something to me, the Roe v. Wade thing. It's like, this is a very, very rare instance. Okay, for people who talk about the Supreme Court, right? People talked about gay marriage, all these issues, and now there's a problem, there's overreach of government. This is a very rare instance where the court actually stepped back from power and said, we're going to do nothing with this, and states can do whatever they want. Like, anyone who just says, I believe in freedom,
voters the power.
Exactly. It's destroying democracy. I'm going, why the unelected court saying this should go to your elected officials?
Yes.
Like, I can't think of anything that is more pro-democratic process than that.
Yeah.
But people think it's a ban on abortion.
The people that are freaking out the most haven't even really read it.
No.
They don't understand it. They don't get it.
I know.
And so, I don't know.
Pause it. Haven't read what?
The Constitution.
The decision.
Or the decision.
Wait, they say, is this guy claiming that, like, I read the decision, and
Actually, it's pretty reasonable.
it's pretty reasonable. Look, haven't read what? Is he really suggesting that people don't get what the Dobbs decision did?
No, you got to read it close. If you don't read every word of it, you don't know what it means.
I'm still returning to what the hell Crowder was doing by asking his height.
Oh, no, it's Crowder assumes that this guy comes from a country where everybody's short.
It was, you're an immigrant from this country. Oh, you're kind of tall for that, being an immigrant of that country. That's why he asked.
Yeah, it's just still a little, I just still question some of, Crowder's interactions.
You're pretty muscly.
Yeah,
Like, oh, no,
that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
like the Whitlock thing where he was like, you played pro, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And he was like, I did not play pro football.
Well, right. But.
All right, so they go, oh, is he chewing?
Yeah, he's got some
Crowder's got some
dip in his
there.
pocket.
Yeah, that or like that shredded bubble gum. All right, let's.
Haven't even really read it.
No.
They don't understand it. They don't get it.
I know.
And so, I don't know.
I know. No,
This is about school. Like, when I was growing up, they taught us the Constitution. They taught us our rights. They did all that. Now they're teaching something completely different. And it's ruining
I'll tell you what it is. It's white it's white women.
Okay.
It's white women. I have a joke in Senate. I'm like, we don't need to build a
Wait,
wall on
pause
the
it for
southern
one
border.
second. What did they beep there?
He said white bitches.
Oh, I see. Well, why did they? Because they're afraid that it won't play on YouTube,
Which it will, because I just said it.
or is it that? I don't know. I'm curious.
It's because Crowder has old people that watch his show, and he doesn't want to offend them as they listen to this in the car.
It's white women.
Okay.
It's white women. I have a joke in Senate. I'm like, we don't need to build a wall on the southern border. We need one around every single pottery barn. Just seal them in until 2025, because they all become teachers. Sorry, true heroes. And they have never worked in the private sector. Most of them are public school teachers.
Yes.
And we've even said this today. Look, you know this. As a gay man, probably better than I do. If you see a woman, she's attractive, she's with a man, she's happy, she's conservative. If you see a woman who's past the point of her window and she's single, she's miserable, or she's unattractive,
Has colored hair.
she's always liberal. She's always liberal.
Oh, totally.
Like there was it's
All right, pause it for 1 second.
Demo-
Pause it for 1 second. Why did he say, like, you're a gay man, so you know this?
You know this better than me.
That's the underlying, like, actual. I mean, he's just so many different layers of bigotry, but he feels like it's revelatory that there's a gay man that he's speaking to who might have misogynistic views like him, right? Because he's grouping gay men with women in his mind.
So odd.
You're a gay man. You know what frigid women are like. What are you talking about? Just bonding over some misogyny.
Yeah, that is just an odd sort of like handle to put on that statement. You're a gay man, so you know women are frigid. What?
Right?
Hey, no, actually.
And that's why screw them all together. We should hang out, just the two of us.
Let's go.
She's always liberal. She's always liberal.
Oh, totally.
Like there was and it's almost all
hair.
right now. Think about it. Biden is losing with under 25. He's losing with under 30. He's losing blacks. He's losing Latinos. Huge.
Absolutely.
The only place he still wins is suburban white women. And that's the same thing today. Black people are like, man, I'm proud to be American. And I go, yeah, what is it? Like, man, it ain't perfect, but I'm free. And then white people are like, oh, no, I don't think so. I'm like, really? Because the black guy you claim to speak for that's marginalized, he says you're wrong.
Yeah.
And I really think it's a disconnect, and people think it's an urban thing. It has become a suburban, predominantly. It's generally women, but particularly white women. Latino women aren't nearly as liberal.
It's the white women that are shutting those black voices down, that are not saying what they want.
Well,
black people
also shutting down gay voices.
Right,
Like J.K. Rowling, like TERF, And it's like,
yeah.
really, almost every gay guy I've spoken with is like, yeah, the trans thing is a problem. Like, we're getting a little. This is going to be a problem for us because we don't want to be lumped in with that. It's like white women who are like, no, turf, it's LGBT. I've never heard one gay man say LGBTQAAIP unironically. Not one. In the media, sure.
But in real life?
I mean, I'm sure you run into more of them.
Embarrassing. I'm embarrassed. To be like, I'm not even representing that. That's why I walk away.
Yeah.
I don't even go to the neighborhood anymore. I just don't want to participate in that.
Is it? But I mean, I feel like he gets some areas here. They're nice. They're, it's not like.
Pause it for
it's
a
not
second.
like.
Wait a second. So all gay men agree with Crowder that they don't like that, and this guy doesn't go to the gay bar anymore because they all don't.
Because they all say LGBTAAP, whatever.
I've never heard that either.
Yeah.
That long version.
All right, continue. This is
San Francisco, where they're always around like chokers and stuff on the street.
I mean, you haven't been to Prague.
Yeah.
Like,
is it here since?
Yeah. And then what embarrasses me, like, I've never been to Prague. Yeah. My first Pride I was invited to, I moved here 15 years ago, and it was going to be my first Pride. And I was invited to represent this bar that I frequented. And I was excited, came in that Saturday, saw the platform that I was going to be on, literally a flatbed like platform with poles sticking out of it, right? That was one thing. Then I went inside, the owner was like, here, wear this. And I was like, okay. And then I saw the baskets of candy everywhere. I was like, oh, stuffed animals. And I was like, what's this for? It's like, oh, it's for the kids. Hold on. You want me to wear this and stand on this, holding this pole, and throw candy at kids? No, absolutely not. Walked away.
God.
Never been to a gay pride parade ever after that.
Oh my God.
Because like there's nothing there that represents me.
Right.
And maybe if there was like a group of like conservative gay men that would represent themselves.
There are tons now. Like, I even talk about this where it's like, remember the Florida Don't Say Gay bill. You can't teach kids about sexual issues.
It doesn't even say gay in the entire bill. You haven't read it.
Well,
not you, but like,
no, most people know. I understand.
Not read it.
Well, what's funny to me is there was this like, lesbian on TikTok, and I repeat myself, right? She was like, this is the example of a double standard of heterodoxy versus lesbian women. I'm like, yeah, because we all remember walking up to our second grade teacher being like, yeah, by the way, who are you plowing? Like, it never came up.
Yeah.
Straight people didn't do it because I didn't know their first name of my teacher. They're acting like straight people are telling them like, this is my partner, this is what we do, this is the parade we attend. It never came up. This is the group that wants to bring it up with kindergartners. And it's like, then they say it's a double standard. It's like, no, you're right, it's a double standard because of what you want to do.
These little kids don't know any of these things, and they're already treating each other equally.
Yeah. As a general rule, they tend to, and then we screw them up.
Now we're putting this stuff in their heads, and it's like,
ugh. Well, you give me hope for the country, man. People like you, and honestly, I'd tell you, just talking to everyone here, you'd be amazed. It's like, I've been working on this for a long time. Black Americans are inherently like more conservative than any group. They just don't realize it. They vote Democrat, but I'm like, yeah, America's great.
Washed into thinking like these are my people.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not these are your people. It's an ideology.
Right. Yeah, and most of them don't share it. So, all right, go. I don't want to keep giving a haircut, but thank you, man.
Real expose. Crowder found a fan / potentially new
I found this
friend.
gay guy who's going to really expose the gays. He doesn't go to Pride or gay bars, but he's really plugged into the scene and what they're doing.
Oh, and by the way, just as a capper, black people really aren't that liberal.
Yeah.
But thanks again.
And they just don't know how they actually feel about themselves. Like, Crowder doesn't see anybody outside of himself or white men in his circle as individuals. Like, the only reason that he found that, newsworthy, essentially, is because he's caricatured gay people in his mind that they're connected with other women. And he, thinks it's just, I don't know, revelatory that he's gonna crap on white women and other gay people. Like, no, gay people can be self-interested too. Gay people can not feel a connection with the stereotypical community that he has in his mind. There's many gradations. There's class analysis within people who have different sexual orientations. I know conservative gay people.
Peter Thiel doesn't think women should be able to vote.
Yeah, there we go. Great example.
I can't even get over how completely nothing burger that is.
It's just repeating the propaganda lines. Like, you didn't read. You didn't read it to two different things. To
yes, the Don't Say Gay bill.
And the Roe decision.
Look, we know the implications of the don't say gay. We're starting to see it. It really, the best analogy is sort of like the exceptions, life of the mother. You create a situation where the assessment of these things, whether they are promoting, sexuality or introducing them to some notion of of sexuality by saying like my partner, who is also a man, and I am a man, and you keep that vague, and the cost so high that they edit people and censor people before that happens. So you can't talk about anything. And I got news for you. The number of teachers that I had over the years who incidentally mentioned that they were married or their husband or their wife. We went on a trip, my husband, my wife. And you can't do that if your husband or wife is same sex. That is considered teaching kids about sexuality. But the whole thing is just absurd. Somebody says, Eli from Jersey says, can somebody pitch this guy's voice up? Can we see who on his staff it is?
I mean, he's the gay smoke monster from Lost. Why did they make it pink?
Also, it was bleeding. It was bleeding onto Crowder too. Like he walked away, and there was some blob going on his hair.
Yeah.
All right, let's read 10 IMs and then we're out of here, folks. I'm sorry. I know everybody got shortchanged. Is this me? Hi, Sam. Can I get a shofar for my son Brian? He turns 1 today, and he's your smallest fan.
Oh,
there we go. Talia from Tampa, my idiot governor will say one day what the cartels are doing is terrible and wrong, and the next day say, well, we aren't giving any notice by the cartels, so why would we give notice to the blue states? Mark Monkey, gotta love this guy's enlightened centrism. He simultaneously declares education is an investment, ignores societal investment, and defends K through 12, and then wrongly claims that most of the debt is from gender studies. So wait, which is it? Is it an investment or not? Does the market always decide what's best for society? Did the market decide that cigarettes were correct and moral? Ignoring the reality of what your society would create is classic libertarian ANCAPs exist. They also believe they would not be subject to the worst parts of their own society. Who's laughing now? Doesn't economics say that you will make decisions that give you any sort of return, even if it's only 10%, and that you make the best decisions given the circumstances you're in? I've heard Pacman make the argument that it will lead to the person or company making more investments and spending it because then 100% of that money goes where they want it to. Yeah, the dynamic is like that 10% of every dollar you make over 3 million is going to have more value to you because no one else is making that kind of money. It's all relative, right? I mean, it's all relative. That 10% is going to have the same amount of value to you. Buying power of that 10%, extra $10 will be that much more too, because everybody will be subject to it. A square. Wow, Ron DeSangano. Sangano is slang for moron in Spanish. Oh, I like that. Is tap dancing fast in that press conference. Sooner or later, his handlers are going to give him a bad advice or he's just going to get full of himself. Sam, did I understand correct that Weigel thinks the Dems keeping the House is not probable? That's what I took from that. Left Okie. Wealth income inequality is just normal. Oh, my bad. I didn't know. Yes, he does. While shorting his employees on wages and benefits, this dude is a joke. Chuck E. Cheese Cheeks. I majored in biology because it was STEM and supposed to make me good money, and I'm still only making $43K 3 years out of college. I wouldn't have been able to afford my rent last year if I had to pay back my student loans. This guy is nutter.
The big conceit is this idea that capitalists are there waiting to pay people that and prioritize the right sort of jobs for society, and that's just fallacious. My entire generation saw the smartest people go in to create stupid, like, collateralized debt obligations for banks, and then once that crashed, they went and did different sort of ad surveillance tech for tech companies. Capitalists don't know the right priorities for people to be pursuing.
Melancholy news story said the funds for DeSantis stunt went from unspent federal COVID money. I'm still curious as to, like, who got that money?
Ken Klippenstein, I've read a little bit of it in the middle of your debate. Sorry. Has an article out about it, actually. People should check it out on The Intercept.
North Dakota llama. It's been 6 years since Dakota Access Pipeline protests started. Since then, it sparked a wave of state legislation as many 24 red states and even purple states like Minnesota restricting people's rights to protest specifically against pipelines. Get a strange sense in my gut that Sunoco and other oil companies are going to try again, as there are whispers in the winds that the oil boom here is going to pick up again. I pray I'm wrong. Who knows? Question for Matt, because I couldn't figure out why. Any idea why North Dakota is the only state that doesn't require voter registration?
They do now, I think, since I've moved, but they didn't when I lived there. And I guess the long answer is they had a history of sort of like open elections, including open primaries, to the point where you had the nonpartisan league running on both ballots. So they had a very open system that the Republicans, I think, are closing.
Brennan from Kentucky. Might be funny to get a cardboard cutout stand-in for Emma during these debates. Eric from San Diego. Not a debt transfer. The U.S. budget doesn't operate like a bank. Fiat currency and taxpayers have nothing to do with debt relief. Indeed. I didn't want to get into the whole MMT and that type of thing, but Train Boy. I don't get why we can't teach humanities in high school. Why do we need conformity factory like college? Holy shit, this guy majored in econ? Talk about bullshit, useless majors. Most of Amazon's profits come from their cloud computing services, something that has been around for long before they got into that game. Also, stopping Bezos would have been good.
I know, he was, but he sees that kind of person as a god.
Professional dumpster fire. This is an amazing interview about rail labor. Well, there's your problem. And Work Stoppage did an amazing podcast about the state of rail labor, and an actual lockout by the unions would cause a massive food and critical goods shortage in the U.S. is just bonkers, because the mainstream media is just talking about how this will affect inflation and not things like food availability or clean drinking water. You all might want to get in contact with Justin Rosniak from WTYP. If you want a rail labor history. Maybe that might be fun to do. All right, two more. Eddie Munster. Oof, getting Christian Walker vibes from this guy. And the final I am of the day. Can I get a shofar from my friend and fellow MR member Josh, who just welcomed his second child? And that reminds me, producer emeritus of this show, Josh Orton, just welcomed his first child.
Oh, wow.
Welcome to Hazel.
Congrats, Josh.
All right, folks. Bradley, Matt, Emma, good job today. Again, apologies. Emma will be here tomorrow. See you on Friday. Bye-bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive,